Chapter 1790. Suddenly, a group of people appeared here. The weakest amongst them was at the space-time realm. The black-robed man who led the group possessed an unfathomable aura. Xiao Linlang frowned slightly when she saw the black-robed man. Wang Zhan, an extraordinary genius of the Battle God Pavilion who was equally famous as Li Yaoye. Wang Zhan was slightly stunned when he saw Xiao Linlang, and then he said, "Miss Linlang, you're here as well?" Xiao Linlang grinned. "I never expected that Brother Wang would be here as well." Wang Zhan glanced at Yi Xian. "Miss Linlang, this is?" Xiao Linlang replied. "He's Yi Xian." Yi Xian. Wang Zhan was slightly stunned. He'd naturally heard of Yi Xian's name. After all, Yi Xian had killed inner court disciples and elite disciples in the Great Spirit God Palace. But now Yi Xian had been expelled from the Great Spirit God Palace. Wang Zhan sized up Yi Xian and said, "Brother Yi is injured?" Yi Xian wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth and nodded, "Yes." As he spoke, he clenched his fists tightly and had a ferocious expression on his face. "The tiny abode is truly detestable. They actually took all the divine artifacts from the ruins of Sword Sect and kept them to themselves. How infuriating." Wang Zhan and the others behind him had quite unsightly expressions on their faces. They were too late. They'd rushed over as soon as they found out that the intent of the Sword Dao had vanished, but they hadn't expected that they would actually be too late. Meanwhile, Wang Zhan suddenly asked, "Someone from the tiny abode came?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes. Quite a few came. They seized all the treasures of the ruins of Sword Sect. They even wanted to kill me to keep me quiet. I would have been dead if Miss Linlang hadn't arrived in time." Wang Zhan turned around to gaze at Xiao Linlang. She hesitated for a moment before she nodded. She'd just taken 1,000,000 eternal divine crystals from them, so she had no choice but to cooperate. The faces of Wang Zhan and the others fell when they heard Xiao Linlang. They were really too late. Right at this moment, an extremely terrifying aura suddenly swept over from the horizon. "Great Sage!" Everyone turned their heads to look at the sky. The sky had suddenly split apart, and then an old man walked out slowly. As soon as the old man appeared, his gaze immediately fell on Yi Xian. "Yi Xian!" Yi Xian shouted angrily, "Little cave heaven! Aren't you going to let it go after snatching the treasure?" The old man frowned. "What are you talking about?" Yi Xian glared at the old man. "You're still playing dumb." Meanwhile, everyone in the surroundings gazed at the old man. Although the old man was a great sage, they were not afraid of him. After all, there were many people. In the sky, the old man stared at Yi Xian. "What are you talking about?" Yi Xian said angrily, "Old man, you're still playing dumb." As he spoke, he tore off his clothes. Beneath his clothes, his chest had already split open and was still bleeding. Yi Xian stared at the old man and spoke with grief and indignation. "I don't want the 100,000,000 eternal divine crystals and 50 divine rank springs of eternal life from the ruins of Sword. I don't want them, all right? Why do you have to be so ruthless?" As soon as these words were spoken, everyone in the surroundings was stunned. 100,000,000 eternal divine crystals. 50 divine rank springs of eternal life. Everyone's heads were buzzing. Meanwhile, Yi Xian continued, "And those divine weapons and treasures that surpass the ancient god rank. I don't want them anymore. I don't want them anymore. They belong to your little cave heaven. Please let me go." The old man spoke angrily. "Kid, what are you playing at? When did my little cave heaven obtain those things?" Yi Xian hurriedly said, "No. I misspoke. Yes, your little cave heaven didn't obtain those things. I misremembered. I'm sorry, I misremembered." The old man was speechless. At this moment, the gazes of everyone here had shot towards the old man. Wang Zhan gazed at the old man. "I never expected that the little cave heaven would be able to destroy that Sword Dao intent. Amazing." The old man looked coldly at the website. "Are you brainless? He's clearly framing you, yet you believe him?" The corners of Wang Zhan's mouth curled up slightly. "Are you saying that I'm brainless?" The old man stared at Wang Zhan. "If you are, then would you believe him?" Wang Zhan gazed at the old man. "He's a swordsman, and swordsman cultivates the heart. I don't believe that a swordsman would go against his conscience and lie. Of course, that's not important now. The important thing is that I don't like you at all." As he spoke, he suddenly leaped up and smashed his fist forward. The aura of his fist instantly enveloped the entire world. The old man's expression instantly changed when he saw this punch. He didn't dare act carelessly, so he took a step forward and smashed his fist forward. The power of a saint. With this punch, the entire world became illusory. Bang! A world-shaking explosion suddenly resounded in the sky, and then the old man retreated explosively. However, Wang Zhan hadn't taken a single step back. Wang Zhan had won this collision. The old man was extremely shocked as he gazed at Wang Zhan. "Who are you?" A wisp of a cold smile arose on the corners of Wang Zhan's mouth. "I'm your fucking ancestor." As he spoke, he charged forward. Bang! As soon as he charged forward, a strand of powerful aura enveloped the old man, and then the space around the old man instantly started burning. The old man was horrified and he hurriedly took a step forward while he clenched his right hand into a fist, and then he smashed his fist forward. Bang! A golden image flashed into appearance on his fist. Meanwhile, Wang Zhan's fist had arrived. Rumble. In an instant, the entire world trembled violently. The spectators watched as the old man retreated explosively by over 3 kilometers. Moreover, his entire body split apart as soon as he stopped moving and only his soul remained. However, Wang Zhan hadn't taken a single step back. Xian glanced at Wang Zhan. He had to admit that the super geniuses of the ancient god galaxy were all extremely terrifying. Wang Zhan was at the minor saint realm, but his strength had completely crushed the old man who was at the saint realm. In the distance, the old man who only had his soul left was slightly stunned. "My body is gone. It's gone just like that?" As if he had thought of something, he suddenly looked at Wang Zhan and roared furiously, "Do you know who I am? I'm from the small cave world." Wang Zhan was about to speak when Xian suddenly said, "Old man, do you know who this person is? He's the #1 super genius in the ancient god galaxy, Wang Zhan." As he spoke, he looked at Wang Zhan with eyes filled with admiration. "I've heard that Brother Wang is the #1 genius in the ancient god galaxy. It's my honor to meet you today." At the side, Xiao Linlang glanced at Xian with a trace of vigilance in her eyes. She was very clear about Xian's strength, and he was absolutely not weaker than Wang Zhan. However, in front of Wang Zhan, he acted as if he was not as good as Wang Zhan. He was too scheming. He was so good at playing dirty tricks. Was this guy really a swordsman? Not far away, when Wang Zhan heard Xian's words, he was slightly stunned. Then he smiled and said, "Brother Yi, you're too polite. As far as I know, Brother Yi is also a super genius." Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Before I met Brother Wang, I also thought I was a super genius, but now..." As he spoke, he sighed in a low voice. "After meeting Brother Wang, I finally understood that there's always someone better than you. If there's a chance in the future, I'd like to learn from Brother Wang." Wang Zhan laughed. "I don't deserve to learn from you, but we can exchange some pointers." Xian quickly said, "I don't dare to exchange pointers. If Brother Wang can give me some pointers, I'll benefit a lot." Xiao Linlang stared at Xian. "How can you be so pretentious?" In the sky, Wang Zhan smiled and said, "Brother Yi, previously the people from Great Spiritual God Palace said that you're extremely arrogant, but I feel that you're quite an honest person. It seems that the rumors can't be trusted." Xian smiled slightly. "In this world, no one has the qualifications to be arrogant in front of Brother Wang. Everyone, this bootlicking." Xiao Linlong's eyes were slowly closing. She couldn't stand it anymore. Wang Zhan, on the other hand, laughed out loud. Being flattered by ordinary people made him feel disgusted. However, if he was flattered by a monster, then it would be a different story. What he, Wang Zhan, loved to do the most was to subdue the monstrous geniuses of his generation. Because of the sense of achievement. At this moment, Xian suddenly said in a deep voice, "Brother Wang, let this old man go." Wang Zhan frowned slightly. "Why?" Xian glanced at the old man. "This old man is from the minor abode. Brother Wang, if you kill him, then the minor abode will probably put a bounty on your head." Xiao Linlang glanced at the old man's soul when she heard Xian, and then she shook her head. "The old man is gone." Sure enough, Wang Zhan smiled proudly when he heard Xian. "Why would I, Wang Zhan, fear the minor abode?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. The old man's expression instantly changed drastically, and he was just about to flee when a fist smashed against him. Bang! The old man's soul was instantly obliterated, and even his consciousness was obliterated. He was killed. Some of the others here fell silent when they witnessed this scene. Wang Zhan represented Halberd. So, how could the minor abode tolerate him killing someone from the minor abode? Of course not. However, the battle pavilion would never give up on Wang Zhan. Wang Zhan was the future of the battle pavilion. Meanwhile, Wang Zhan waved his right hand, and one of the old man's spatial rings floated into his grasp. There were only some ordinary treasures and divine crystals within it. Wang Zhan turned around to gaze at Yi Xian. "Brother Yi." Yi Xian spoke solemnly. "They've probably moved." Wang Zhan's face instantly fell when he heard this. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Brother Wang, the minor abode will definitely take revenge on you." Wang Zhan smiled proudly. "Let them." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Brother Wang, I have to flee. The minor abode will probably not let me go as well. I have to hide. I'll seek guidance from Brother Wang if I have the chance in the future." Wang Zhan hesitated for a moment before he nodded. "All right." Yi Xian cupped his fists. "Brother Wang, will meet again." As soon as he finished speaking, he gazed at Xiao Linlang. "Miss Linlang, will meet again." Xiao Linlang gazed at Yi Xian. "Young Master Yi, take care of yourself." Yi Xian nodded, and then he transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the horizon. Wang Zhan gazed at Yi Xian, who'd vanished into the horizon, and he spoke softly. "Brother Yi isn't a bad person. Why is the Great Spiritual God Palace bad-mouthing him? The Great Spiritual God Palace is really despicable." Xiao Linlang was speechless. "P.S. I forgot to ask for votes yesterday. I lost a few thousand monthly votes." Chapter 1791. After leaving the ruins of Sword Sect, Yi Xian went straight to a mountain range. Somewhere by a river, Yi Xian sat on the ground with his legs crossed. In front of him were 3 storage rings. One of the storage rings contained over 100 million eternal divine crystals. There were originally more than 150 million of them. He let Ling Xinxin take more than 50 million eternal divine gems away, and these 50 million eternal divine gems were enough to raise the strength of the entire Sword Alliance by a large level. Especially when Ling Xinxin brought back some cultivation methods and sword skills. They were too useful for the Sword Alliance. It wouldn't be long before the overall strength of the Sword League would reach the level of a superforce in the ancient Godstar region. Because the Sword Alliance's swordsmen's innate gifts were terrifying. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked at the second storage ring. With a thought, a sword floated out from the storage ring. The sword was 4 feet long and 3 fingers wide. There was a lightning-like shape on the blade. It was the best sword among all the swords in the ruins of Sword Sect. Yi Xian sized up the sword. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from within the sword. "Are you the new master?" It had a spirit. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Yes." "What's your name?" The sword said, "My name is Sword Mausoleum. I am the strongest sword in the history of the Mausoleum of Sword Sect. There is no sword more powerful than mine in this world." His voice was filled with pride. Yi Xian blinked. "Really?" The Sword Mausoleum said proudly, "Of course." Yi Xian opened his palm and the green profound sword appeared in his hand. "What about this one?" The Sword Mausoleum suddenly trembled and said in shock, "This?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "How are you?" "Well." Sword Mausoleum started crying, "You bullied me." Yi Xian's face darkened. "Damn it. Could this sword belong to a child?" The Sword Ruins suddenly said, "Master, quickly put it away." I'm afraid." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Why are you afraid?" Sword Mausoleum said in a trembling voice, "Aura. That sword has a terrifying aura." Yi Xian was silent. The other party might be talking about Qing'er. This green profound sword was personally forged by Qing'er, so it was normal for it to have her aura. The Mausoleum of Swords was afraid of Qing'er. Yi Xian sheathed the Qingxian sword. He looked at the Mausoleum of Swords and smiled. "How about you follow me from now on? This Sword Mausoleum's level should be at peak ancient god realm, just right for him." The Sword Mausoleum hesitated for a moment before he said, "Can I refuse?" Yi Xian laughed. "Why?" The Sword Ruins said, "You don't look like a good person." Yi Xian's face darkened. "As a sword, do you still need to differentiate between good and bad masters?" The Sword Ruins said, "Of course. What if I choose someone who doesn't have a conscience and doesn't treat me well?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "I will treat you well." The Sword Ruins said, Then can I make a request? Xian said, tell me about it. The sword ruins hurriedly said, I need to be nourished with powerful sword qi and sword intent. Are you willing to nourish me every day? Xian laughed. That's not a problem at all. The sword ruins said, then I'll follow you. Xian smiled. Then we're friends from now on. The sword ruins said, you're the master. Xian shook his head. We're friends. The sword ruins was silent for a moment before he said, is there any difference between friends and masters? Xian was speechless. This chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. He really didn't know how to answer this question. The sword ruins said, since there's no difference then I'll call you master. Xian said with a smile, as you wish. At this moment Xiao Ta suddenly said, young lord let it play with me and soul. Xian said in a low voice, Xiao Ta don't lead them astray. Xiao Ta was a little displeased. Am I that kind of tower? Xian said indifferently, you're not serious. Xiao Ta. Xian didn't talk nonsense with Xiao Ta anymore. He put away the sword ruins and looked at the third storage ring. There was only one sword technique in the third storage ring. Sword kinesis technique. The ruins of sword sect definitely had more than this sword technique. However, even the powerful ruins of sword sect's sword techniques were far inferior to the sword drawing technique in life and death with one sword. Therefore he didn't choose to learn those. However, this sword kinesis technique was very helpful to him. He wanted to create a flying sword technique of his own now. As for the other sword techniques and mental cultivation techniques in the ruins of sword sect, as well as the good swords, he let Ling Xinxin bring all of them back to the sword alliance. He couldn't fight alone. He had to nurture the sword alliance. A moment later Xian disappeared on the spot. When he reappeared he was already in an unknown dead star field. Cultivate the flying sword technique. Xian opened his palm, and a sword condensed from the power of time and space suddenly appeared in his hand. The next moment the sword appeared thousands of feet away. Speed. The core of the flying sword was speed. He wanted to cultivate this speed to the extreme. The moment he wanted to kill the enemy had to die. Just like that, Xian combined the advantages of the sword kinesis technique and kept increasing the speed of his flying sword. There was no limit, only an even higher limit. Small Grotto Heaven. The small Grotto Heaven's Grotto Heaven master sat on a rock beside the bamboo house with his eyes closed. He seemed to have become one with heaven and earth. At that moment, a shadow appeared in front of the old man. The shadow bowed slightly. Grotto Heaven Master, Elder Yu who went to look for Xian was killed by the battle pavilion. Hearing that, the old man frowned slightly. Killed by the battle pavilion? Elder Yu nodded. He was killed by that monster from the battle pavilion Wang Zhan. As for the reason, that Wang Zhan said that Elder Yu insulted him. A cold glint flashed across the elder's eyes. This battle pavilion is so impressive. How dare you kill the people of my little Grotto Heaven? The virtual figure nodded. They are indeed disrespecting my small cave. However, I still feel that there is something fishy about this matter. However, the old man shook his head. I don't care. Since they killed our people, we naturally have to return the favor. Send someone to kill one of their great sages. The figure hesitated for a moment and then he said, doing so might cause hostility between us and it might even lead to war. The old man glanced at the phantom. If they aren't afraid, why should we be? If we don't return the favor, the world will think that we are afraid of the battle pavilion. Kill. The phantom thought for a moment then said, if the war starts, the old man said indifferently, then let's fight. The small Grotto Heaven was not afraid of the battle pavilion at all. Moreover, the small Grotto Heaven was backed by the supreme laws of the universe. With the supreme laws of the universe, the small Grotto Heaven was not afraid of any forces in this world. The phantom turned around and left. At this moment the old man suddenly said, what about Xian's whereabouts? The phantom said in a deep voice, he is hiding. The palace master of the Great Spiritual Palace has already made it clear that they have expelled Xian from the Great Spiritual Palace, and they will not interfere in the matters between us and him. The old man was silent. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. After a while he asked again, is there still no news of the lady in the plain dress? The phantom shook his head. Still no news. The old man said, issue a universal bounty. Anyone who knows where this lady is will be rewarded with 300,000 eternal divine crystals. Since she is severely injured, there will be many extraordinary people who will help us find this lady." The phantom nodded. "All right." After that he turned around and left. The old man lay on the bamboo chair and slowly closed his eyes. "Those who offend my small cave will be killed no matter how far they are." The Battle Pavilion. The Battle Pavilion was located on a lonely mountain in the north of the ancient god galaxy. On this day, a corpse suddenly fell from the sky above the Battle Pavilion. In front of a palace, a middle-aged man looked at the corpse and said, "The small cave has made a move." This man was the current pavilion master of the Battle Pavilion, Zhou Xian. An elder of the Battle Pavilion spoke in a low voice, "The tiny abode is declaring war against us." Zhou Xian was expressionless. "Where's Wang Zhan?" At this moment Wang Zhan suddenly appeared. He glanced at the corpse on the ground and his face darkened. "The small cave did this." Zhou Xian looked at Wang Zhan. "Why did you kill him?" "I am not blaming you, but I feel that there is something fishy about this." After a moment of silence Wang Zhan said, "This man insulted me, so I attacked him. As for killing him, he was too arrogant and I couldn't control myself." Couldn't control himself. Everyone was speechless. This was the small cave. No matter what, they should have left some leeway. Of course they did not blame Wang Zhan. What a joke. He was the future of the Battle Pavilion. Meanwhile, a middle-aged man in a white robe suddenly said, "Pavilion Master, if we fight back, then it's equivalent to declaring war. If we don't fight back, then our Battle Pavilion will be humiliated." Zhou Xian looked at the middle-aged man in a white robe. "Elderly, what do you think?" Elderly shook his head. "It's not worth it to start a war like this. It's even more meaningless. Because once we start a war, it won't just be one or two of us who will die. But if we don't start a war, the world will think that the Battle Pavilion is afraid of the small cave." As he spoke, he smiled. "I have an idea. Let Wang Zhan fight the geniuses of the small cave's younger generation and have a life and death battle." A life and death battle. As soon as he said this, everyone nodded their heads. That's a good idea. But if Wang Zhan can't defeat them? Everyone looked at Wang Zhan. Wang Zhan laughed. "I, Wang Zhan, am not afraid of anyone in the younger generation." Meanwhile, Elderly shook his head. "Little fellow, I know you are a genius, but don't underestimate the geniuses of the world. Putting everything else aside, Li Yaoye, Xiao Linlang and that guy from Sky Demon Nation are not any weaker than you. And that Yixian who just appeared, this person is not simple." Wang Zhan suddenly laughed. "Yixian?" Elderly nodded. "You know him?" Wang Zhan smiled and said, "I met him before. This person's character is not bad, but his strength is a little weak. He even said that he would come to me for guidance in the future." Elderly frowned. "He said that?" Wang Zhan nodded. "This person is not bad. He didn't know why the great spiritual god palace kept bad-mouthing him. How unethical." After a moment of silence, Elderly said, "In short, don't look down on anyone, understand?" Wang Zhan nodded. "I understand." Zhou Xiao suddenly said, "Fighting against the monstrous geniuses and geniuses of the small caves, not only does it concern the reputation of the Battle Pavilion, it also concerns your life and death. Are you confident?" Wang Zhan laughed. "Yes." Zhou Xiao nodded. "Send the letter of challenge to the Little Paradise." A letter of challenge. End of chapter. Chapter 1792. A dual invitation. Soon, a dual invitation was sent to the small cave. The news spread across the entire ancient Godstar area and the small caves like a plague. The Battle Pavilion's action was equivalent to a public challenge to the small cave. The small cave would definitely accept it, because it was related to the small cave's reputation. How embarrassing it would be if it didn't accept it. Soon the small cave replied, "Accept the dual invitation." The two sides agreed to have a duel in the ancient star field 3 days later. It would be a battle of life and death. This duel had undoubtedly attracted the attention of countless people. Some people rushed to the ancient star field. At this moment Yixian was still cultivating. In the dead silent starry sky, countless flying swords were flying around. They were all spacetime swords created by Yixian. At this time Yixian suddenly opened his palm. In an instant all the spacetime swords flew back to his palm. In the surrounding starry sky, There were many residual shadows of the flying swords. Their speed was simply too fast. Now, the speed of his flying swords was so fast that even he was a bit afraid of them. Especially if they were used for a sneak attack, even he would find it difficult to resist them, let alone others. His flying sword art could be considered to have reached the initial level. In terms of power, the current flying sword art was not as terrifying as drawing the sword to decide life and death. However, in terms of speed it was much faster. It could be said that even a great sage would find it difficult to resist his flying sword art. Xian put away the space-time swords and looked around. The residual shadows of the flying swords were still around. Xian laughed and waved his right hand. The residual shadows of the flying swords instantly disappeared. At this time the space in front of Xian suddenly trembled. Soon, Dao Yi's voice was heard in front of him. "Are you going to the ancient star field?" Ancient star field. Xian took out the Qingxian sword. With a thought he appeared right in front of the Taoist side of Lingshu Peak. Seeing Xian's sudden appearance, Dao Yi was stunned. "You?" Xian smiled. "You mentioned the ancient star field just now. What's going on?" Dao Yi said, "Don't you know? The Battle Pavilion has issued a dual invitation to the small cave. Send a letter of challenge." Xian was taken aback. "Challenge?" Dao Yi nodded. "Yes." Xian was silent. He didn't expect that the Battle Pavilion and the small heavenly abode would start a war. Dao Yi continued, "But it won't be an all-out war. The Battle Pavilion had sent out Wang Zhan. Both sides had sent out the younger generation. The kind that decides life and death." Xian asked in a deep voice, "Who did the small grotto heaven send?" Dao Yi shook his head. "I don't know yet." As she spoke, she paused for a moment before she continued, "No matter what the final outcome of this battle is, both sides will probably become mortal enemies." Xian nodded. The Battle Pavilion had sent out Wang Zhan. He was the future of the Battle Pavilion, and the little cave world would definitely not send an ordinary person. No matter which one of them died, the other would not accept it. Therefore both sides had completely turned against each other. Dao Yi said, "Let's go." Xian nodded. As both of them were about to leave, a man appeared at the entrance of the courtyard. When the man saw Xian, he was stunned. "Who are you?" Xian frowned. "Who are you?" The man stared at Xian. "I am an inner disciple, Gu Yun." "Inner disciple." Xian looked at Gu Yun. "What's the matter?" Gu Yun took a glance at Dao Yi and narrowed his eyes. "What's the relationship between you and Miss Dao Yi?" Xian held Dao Yi's hand and smiled. "What's the relationship between us?" Dao Yi took a glance at Xian and said nothing. On the other hand, Gu Yun flew into a rage. "How dare you? How can an outer disciple like you be worthy of Miss Dao Yi?" This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. At this time. "Brother Yi, why are you here?" Xian turned his head. Not far away, Li Xiuran was walking quickly towards him. Li Xiuran was obviously happy to see Xian. He quickly walked towards Xian and smiled. "Brother Yi, long time no see." Xian smiled. "Brother Li, you seem to have become stronger." Li Xiuran was about to speak when Gu Yun suddenly said in a trembling voice, "You are Xian." Xian looked at Gu Yun and smiled. "I am Xian. Do you have a problem?" Gu Yun's face turned pale. Xian looked at Gu Yun. "Dao Yi is my woman. Do you understand?" Gu Yun hurriedly said, "Yes, I understand. I will never appear in front of Miss Dao Yi again." Xian smiled. "It's not that serious. Just don't harass her." Gu Yun trembled. "Yes, yes." Then he turned and ran. Xian. Who doesn't know Xian's name? This is a person who dares to kill a true disciple. He actually knows about Xian. But he has never seen Xian. He didn't expect Xian to come again. Wasn't he expelled from Great Spiritual God Palace? In the courtyard, Xian looked at Li Xiuran. "Brother Li, have you entered the inner sect?" Li Xiuran laughed. "I don't want to enter the inner sect anymore." Xian was puzzled. "Why?" Li Xiuran smiled. "Outer sect disciples are treated very well now. Moreover, the inner sect is still ostracizing us. So it's fine if we don't go." Xian said. "Is it because of me?" Li Xiuran smiled. "Actually, we still have to thank you. If it wasn't for you, the palace wouldn't even care about the outer sect." The treatment of outer sect disciples is no worse than that of inner sect disciples. Xianran smiled. It's good that I didn't cause you any trouble. Li Xiuran smiled. Brother Yi, are you and Miss Dao Yi going to Ancient Star Sector? Xian nodded. You're going too? Li Xiuran laughed. Such a big event, of course I have to go. Xian smiled. Then let's go together. After saying that, the three of them disappeared. In space, Xian flew on his sword. Beside him were Dao Yi and Li Xiuran. Although his Azure Profound Sword can teleport across Star Sector, he needs to know the exact location of Ancient Star Sector. Otherwise he can't teleport. At this time, Dao Yi suddenly turned to look at Xian. Am I your woman? Xian blinked. I'm afraid that he will harass you frequently. Dao Yi stared at Xian. Is that so? Xian said seriously. Of course. You know that I'm a very pure person. Dao Yi shook her head. You told me that the world is too bitter. Now it seems that it's complete nonsense. I think that you should suffer a little more. Xian, Dao Yi said. The speed at which your strength grows is too terrifying. In the past she could suppress Xian. But now Xian can suppress her. And how long has it been? This guy's cultivation speed is too ridiculous. Xian smiled. I've never forgotten those days. How hard was it for him? But I feel like crying when I think about it. His enemies were always abnormal and they were always several levels higher than him. How can I win? I can't win at all. At that time it's not that I'm too weak. It's that my enemies are too strong. Dao Yi looked at Xian. What do you plan to do next? Plan. Xian smiled. Become stronger. If this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Dao Yi asked again. How strong? Xian was silent for a moment. Then he smiled. Stronger than Qing'er and Dad. Dao Yi looked at Xian. Are you serious? Xian smiled. I've never been so serious. He knew that if he doesn't become stronger than Qing'er and Dad, he can't stop them from competing. Dao Yi said softly, do your best. Xian smiled. I will. Half an hour later, the three of them arrived at Ancient Star Sector. Ancient Star Sector is an abandoned star sector. However, this place is not completely dead. There is life in this star sector. However, only some rogue cultivators live here. Ancient City. When the three of them arrived in front of the ancient city, Xian looked at the ancient city. It is very old and dilapidated. However, from the size of the city, it must have been glorious in the past. Li Xiuran suddenly said. There are many people here. Xian looked inside the city. Indeed, there are many people here. The three of them were about to enter when a figure suddenly fell from the sky. Bang! That figure fell directly in front of Xian's group. Xian looked at the person in the pit. When he saw that person, he was stunned. He knows the person in the pit. It's that old Li who tried to fool him when he first arrived at Ancient God Star Sector. At this time, a young man suddenly appeared in front of Xian's group. The young man glanced at Xian's group and did not speak. Inside the pit, old Li climbed up. When he saw Xian, old Li was stunned. Then he said, Young Master Yi. Xian looked at old Li. Didn't I tell you to stop? Old Li smiled bitterly. Cultivation requires resources. Sigh. Xian shook his head and sighed. You deserve it. Old Li's smile became more bitter. If I can't improve further, I will become older and older. I've made a fool of myself in front of young Master Yi. Xian thought for a moment. Then he turned to look at the young man beside him. Brother, how should I address you? The young man looked at Xian. You want to save him? Xian was about to speak. Then he thought of something and shook his head. No. Then he looked at Dao Yi and Li Xiuran. Let's go. Dao Yi glanced at it and nodded. The three of them walked into the city. At the side, old Li's face turned pale. Young Master Yi. Xian stopped and looked at old Li. Old Li, if you're just fooling people to earn some money, I will save them. But you're not. Not only are you fooling people, but you also want to kill them. All these years, many people have died in your hands, right? Old Li quickly said. I will turn over a new leaf. Xian shook his head. I didn't kill you back then because I wanted to give you a chance to turn over a new leaf. But you didn't listen. If I save an evil person, many innocent people will die in the future. Then he pulled Dao Yi and walked into the city. Old Li's face was ashen. He collapsed on the ground. When he saw Yi Xian, he saw hope from despair. Now that hope turned into despair. The young man looked at Old Li and waved his hand. Boom. Old Li was wiped out. In the distant city, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. In his body, the green profound sword trembled slightly. His sword truth aura was released uncontrollably. Sword truth transformation. Yi Xian was stunned. P.S. The weather is getting colder. Everyone please keep warm. It's too cold. Especially those with children. Many children around me have caught a cold. Everyone please be careful. End of this chapter. Chapter 1793. Heart. A swordsman cultivates the heart, and this heart is not easy to cultivate. Follow one's heart? Yi Xian has always followed his heart. If following one's heart is wrong, why should he follow it? He did want to save Old Li from the start. Because he felt that he knew Old Li, so he wanted to save him. But on second thought, what did Old Li do? He killed him and robbed him. If he saved this kind of person, then in the future more innocent people will die. He must follow one's heart, but he must also subdue it. Because most of the time one's heart is evil. One can be confident but not egotistical. At the city gate, Yi Xian's sword aura was getting stronger, and the reaction of the green profound sword in his body was also getting stronger. It was not only the transformation of the sword. It was also the transformation of the heart. At this time Yi Xian opened his eyes, he opened his palm, and the sword aura on his body flowed back into his palm. Next to Yi Xian, Dao Yi said softly, "Breakthrough?" Yi Xian nodded. "Breakthrough in the sword. Breakthrough in the sword." He did not know what level he was at now, but he knew that he was much stronger than a few breaths ago. At this time Xiao suddenly said, "Young master, you are now a real swordsman." Yi Xian smiled. "A real swordsman?" Xiao said, "Master once said that it is not difficult to follow one's heart, but to subdue it. It is not difficult for a swordsman to do as he pleases, but it is difficult to restrain oneself. Humans are humans because they can restrain themselves and have a set of standards in their heart. Good is good, evil is evil." Yi Xian suddenly said, "That's not right." Xiao asked, "What's not right?" Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Qing, seems to do whatever she wants." Xiao was silent for a moment, then said, "Young master, can you not compare yourself to her? Is it hard to have an idea?" Yi Xian was speechless. Xiao continued, "Young master's current sword Dao realm should be at the descent realm." Yi Xian frowned. "Lower your realm?" Xiao nodded, "Yes. Listen to the inner heart, know the inner heart and descend to the inner heart. The young lord is now in a subduing state. If we're talking about ordinary realms, the current you is equivalent to a great saint." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "In other words, I can be considered a great sage now?" Xiao said, "You can say that. Moreover, after subduing his heart, the power of the young master's sword techniques will be much stronger. Your sword drawing to decide life and death and flying sword technique will be much stronger than before." Yi Xian nodded. "I know. The power of his sword draw to determine life and death was at least 40% stronger than before, and so was the speed of his flying sword." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Most of the time, enlightenment was better than bitter cultivation. He did not expect that his previous action would directly cause his state of mind to break through. However, this also made him understand that following his heart did not mean that he could act recklessly. Subduing his heart. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Xiao, do you know what's above the descent realm?" Xiao said, "I don't know." Yi Xian blinked. "You don't know?" Xiao was a little helpless. "Young master, I'm just a tower." Yi Xian's mouth twitched. "Damn, now you know that you're a tower." At this time Dao Yi suddenly said, "Let's go in." Yi Xian collected his thoughts and nodded. Along the way Yi Xian and the other two kept looking around. It had to be said that the city was really dilapidated. There were ruins everywhere and the smell of decay was also emitting. This city must have been ravaged by something in the past for it to be in its current state. At the end of prosperity was decline. At this time, Li Xiuran suddenly said, "According to the ancient records, this ancient star sector was once very prosperous, even more prosperous than ancient god sector. However, for some reason it declined later." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He could see that this city must have been very prosperous in the past. Li Xiuran said again, "Now this place has become a slum." Yi Xian frowned. Slum. Li Xiaoran nodded. Although the spiritual qi in this place is not completely exhausted, the spiritual qi in this place is no longer suitable for cultivation. Some of the people here have very low cultivation realms, and their lifespans are not particularly long. Because the spiritual qi here is slowly drying up, the air here has been polluted. Yi Xian sensed his surroundings. Indeed, not only was the spiritual qi here pitifully small, the air was also mixed with some bad substances. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly asked, "This place is not a Dead Star sector. They arranged Biwuan here, will it affect this place?" Li Xiaoran shook his head. "No one will care about this." Yi Xian was silent. At this moment, a little girl carrying a backpack suddenly ran in front of the three of them. The little girl wore a floral shirt and cotton pants. The shirt and pants were full of patches. Moreover, it was obviously not in line with the little girl's figure. The shirt and pants were too small, which looked very incongruous. The little girl had too small braids. Her petite face was full of mud, and only a pair of quick-witted eyes could be seen. On the little girl's feet she wore a pair of grass shoes weaved from vines. They were also very small, and the little girl's thumbs were already above the toes of the shoes. As she ran, the little girl's thumbs were bent. Because if she was not careful, her thumbs would come into intimate contact with the ground. The little girl looked at Yi Xian and the other two and bowed respectfully. "Three immortals, are you here to watch the competition?" Yi Xian said with a smile. "Yeah." The little girl hurriedly said, "The competition will only start 2 days later. During this time you need a place to stay. Do you want to go to my house? Even though it's small, it's very clean. 1 low-grade spirit stone is enough." Yi Xian glanced at the little girl's backpack. There were some medicinal herbs in the backpack. The little girl continued, "3 immortals, my home isn't just clean, it's very quiet as well. No one will disturb you." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Only 1 low-grade spirit stone?" The little girl hurriedly nodded. Yi Xian smiled. "All right, then let's go to your home." The little girl was overjoyed when she heard this. She hurriedly said, "3 immortals, please come with me." She turned around and walked away. Yi Xian smiled, and then he followed her with Dao Yi and Li Xiran. It didn't take long for the three of them to arrive at a small courtyard. Needless to say, the courtyard was really small. There were only 3 small rooms and it was extremely run down. But it was really very clean. After entering the courtyard, the little girl pointed at a small courtyard on the side. "3 immortals, you can stay here. If you need anything, just let me know. My name is Xiaoan and I'll be at your service at any time." Yi Xian smiled. "All right." Xiaoan bowed slightly. "I won't disturb you anymore." Then she turned around and walked towards a small room on the right. Meanwhile, Li Xiran suddenly said, "Brother Yi, Miss Dao Yi, both of you rest here. I'll go ask around in the city. I'm afraid there are quite a lot of people coming this time, so I need to understand the situation first." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Great." Li Xiran turned around and left. Dao Yi suddenly said, "Who do you think will win, Wang Zhan or the genius from the small grotto heaven?" Yi Xian shook his head. "It's hard to say. Since the small grotto heaven dared to accept the challenge, they definitely won't send an ordinary genius." Dao Yi nodded. "That's true." Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, an angry roar came from the small room next door. "Zhou, where the hell have you been?" Hearing this, Yi Xian frowned. He walked slowly to the small room on the other side. A man was lying in the room. The man's face was pale and he looked very weak. Xiaoan was cooking by the side. Seeing Yi Xian, Xiaoan quickly ran to them and said with a trembling voice, "Did I disturb you immortals?" Yi Xian smiled. "No." Then he looked at the young man on the bed. "Who is he?" Xiaoan said softly, "He's my brother." Yi Xian looked at the young man. "He looks very weak." Xiaoan lowered his head. "My brother smokes." "Smokes?" Yi Xian frowned. Of course he knew what smokes were. That was something harmful, especially to ordinary people. It was a slow poison. Suddenly the young man shouted angrily, "Haven't you cooked anything good? Do you want to die?" Hearing this, Yi Xian and Dao Yi frowned. Xiaoan said quickly, "It's almost ready." Then she ran to the stove and started cooking. Soon she brought a bowl of porridge to the young man. "Brother, be careful. It's hot." The young man looked at the bowl of porridge and his face changed. He knocked the bowl of porridge down and shouted angrily, You want me to drink this? Where's the meat? Where's the meat? Xiaoan said softly, I didn't sell any herbs today. Trash. The young man suddenly shouted angrily. You're a trash. Stupid trash. Xiaoan lowered his head. Brother. The young man looked at Xiaoan angrily. Why aren't you selling the herbs? Scram. Xiaoan lowered his head and tears flowed down uncontrollably. The young man continued to shout. Cry. You only know how to cry. You're a trash. Wait till I recover. I'll sell you. At this moment, Dao Yi suddenly walked to Xiaoan's side. She gently rubbed Xiaoan's little head. Don't cry. Xiaoan's body trembled slightly. Sorry. Immortal, I'm disturbing you. Dao Yi smiled. No. Then she pulled Xiaoan's hand and said, I'll bring you to buy some meat. Xiaoan shook his head. I don't have money. Dao Yi smiled. I do. With that she pulled Xiaoan out. Yixian took a look at the man lying on the bed and followed him out. Outside. Yixian smiled. Xiaoan, your brother treats you like this. Why do you still take care of him? Xiaoan was silent for a long time. He's the only family I have. Yixian and Dao Yi were silent. Inside the house. The young man was still shouting madly. Useless bitch. Trash. Chapter 1794. Yixian looked at the young man who was still roaring in the room and his eyes gradually turned cold. The young man was beyond cure and his body was rotten. If not for Xiaoan's care he would have been dead. At this time Xiaoan wanted to say something but stopped. Dao Yi smiled and said, You want us to save your brother? Xiaoan lowered her head slightly and said, I don't dare. Dao Yi turned to look at Yixian and Yixian smiled and said, Even if you save him he will not treat you well. Xiaoan turned to look at the room and said softly, But I still want him alive. Yixian said, We can save him. Xiaoan suddenly looked at Yixian and knelt in front of Yixian and said with a trembling voice, Immortal. Yixian helped Xiaoan up and said with a smile, But I have a condition. Xiaoan quickly said, I will agree to anything. I will agree to anything. Yixian looked at Xiaoan and said, We can save him but you have to come with us. Hearing this Xiaoan was stunned and said, I go with you? Yixian nodded and said, Yes. Xiaoan clenched her fists and her eyes were full of disbelief and said, Immortal, you want to take me away? Yixian nodded and said with a smile, Yes. Xiaoan said with a trembling voice, But I don't have any talent. She was in disbelief because sometimes some immortals would come to this place and those immortals would take away some people. However, they were all people with great talent. As long as they were taken away, it was equivalent to changing their fate. But she had never dared to think like this. Yixian gently patted Xiaoan's head and said, You don't need any talent. Just come with me and I will arrange a good home for you. Xiaoan quickly knelt and kowtowed and said, Thank you, Immortal, thank you. Yixian helped him up again. But we won't take your brother away. Xiaoan glanced at Yixian and said in a low voice, Immortal, please spare his life. Hearing this, Yixian was slightly stunned. He gently patted Xiaoan's little head and shook his head with a smile. Smart girl. This little girl had already seen through his murderous intent towards the young man. Not simple at all. Yixian turned around and walked into the house. Xiaoan wanted to follow him, but she hesitated and decided not to. She didn't beg Yixian and Dao Yi to take her brother away because she knew that she wasn't qualified to do so. Before long Yixian walked out, looking at Yixian and was a little nervous. Yixian smiled and said, He has recovered. Xiaoan immediately wanted to kneel down but was stopped by Yixian. Yixian looked at Xiaoan and said, You don't have to kneel in front of us in the future. This sister beside you is Dao Yi. I am Yixian. You can call her sister Dao Yi and call me brother Yixian. Understand? Xiaoan hesitated and nodded. Brother Yixian. Yixian smiled and said, Let's go. Xiaoan blinked. Are we leaving now? Yixian smiled and said, Are you saying goodbye to your brother? Xiaoan was silent for a moment. She looked into the house and said softly, Brother, I can't take care of you anymore. Take care of yourself. After that she turned around and held Yixian's hand. However, she instinctively pulled her hand back. Yixian held Xiaoan's hand and smiled. Let's go. After that he pulled Xiaoan and walked into the distance. At this time he suddenly frowned and opened Xiaoan's palm. There was a black lotus mark on Xiaoan's palm. Xian looked at the black lotus mark and said softly, "What is this?" Xiaoan shook her head. "I don't know. They said it was a birthmark." Xian gently touched the black lotus mark. At this time something strange happened. Xian's finger suddenly started burning, and the next moment, the flames spread to his whole body. Boom! Xian turned into a man of fire. At this moment, the power of bloodline in Xian's body suddenly erupted. Rumble! Xian's power of bloodline forced the flame out of his body, and the flame returned to Xiaoan's palm. At this moment, cold sweat slowly dripped from Xian's forehead. At that moment he was almost burned to ashes. If it wasn't for his power of bloodline, he would have been dead. Even his consciousness would have been erased. At this time Xiaoan's face turned abnormally pale. She said in fear, "Brother Xian." Xian smiled. "I'm fine." After that he looked at the black mark on Xiaoan's palm. Damn it! This Xiaoan is not an ordinary person. At the side, Dao Yi suddenly shook his head. "You're simply a pervert." Xian looked at Dao Yi. "What do you mean?" Dao Yi looked at him and said, "I realize that your sister is not an ordinary person. Even if she's just an adopted sister." Xian, at this moment he was really speechless. This Xiaoan is definitely not an ordinary person. But is it really so coincidental? I just randomly adopted a sister, and this sister is not an ordinary person. Should I go and adopt a few more sisters? At this time, Dao Yi suddenly squatted down and held Xiaoan's hand. At this moment, the black lotus mark had returned to normal and there was no aura. Xiaoan said in a low voice. "This is not simple." Xian nodded. With his current strength it was difficult for anything to hurt him. But just now this thing almost killed him. This is too perverse. Even now he still has some lingering fear. Dao Yi said in a low voice. "What do you plan to do now?" Xian smiled. "What else can I do? Of course I will bring her along. When I have the chance to meet Qing'er, I will ask Qing'er to help me." Xiaoan's background is definitely not simple. Dao Yi thought for a while and nodded. "That's the only way." At this time Xiaoan suddenly said in a low voice. "Brother Xian, are you still willing to have me?" Xian laughed. "Of course. Who knows, you might be able to protect me in the future." Xiaoan blinked. He didn't quite understand. Xian said with a smile, "Let's go." As he spoke he walked to the other side of Xiaoan and held Xiaoan's left hand. He didn't dare to hold Xiaoan's right hand anymore. He was still a little afraid of the flame. The group left the courtyard. Along the way Xiaoan kept introducing the ancient star city to Xian and Xian. There were also some forces in the ancient star city. One of them was called the Gate of Heaven, which was the strongest force in the ancient star system. In Xiaoan's words, there were many people in the Gate of Heaven who could fly. However, when the battle pavilion and the small grotto heaven arranged the arena here, these forces quickly moved out. Obviously they were afraid of being affected by the battle. After all, once such experts entered into battle, then if they didn't have the protection of a formidable sect, then the entire ancient star city would probably be destroyed in an instant. The ordinary people in the city obviously didn't know about this. For example, Xiaoan. Until now she still didn't know what the competition meant. Right at this moment, Li Xiran suddenly appeared in front of Xian and the others. Xian said with a smile, "Did you find out who the small grotto heaven sent this time?" Li Xiran shook his head. "No. It's very mysterious." Xian frowned slightly. "Are there any monstrous geniuses in the small grotto heaven?" "The very famous ones." Li Xiran said in a deep voice. "There are a few, but they are much weaker than Wang Zhan. I'm afraid this matter isn't that simple." Xian said, "What about the battle pavilion? Are they here?" Li Xiran nodded. "They are. They are now in the north." Xian asked again, "What about the small grotto heaven?" Li Xiran said in a deep voice, "They are here too. In the south. But we can't get close." Xian looked towards the south and said with a smile, "It seems that the people the small grotto heaven sent to fight Wang Zhan are not simple." Li Xiran nodded. "The battle pavilion is in a bad situation now because the small grotto heaven knows that they are sending Wang Zhan, but they don't know who they are sending." Xian suddenly asked, "How many people are coming from the small grotto heaven this time?" Li Xiran said, "About a dozen. There are 3 great sages among them." 3 great sages. Yi Xian smiled, and a murderous intent flashed in the depths of his eyes. Right at this moment, roaring laughter suddenly resounded in the sky. The crowd looked towards the source of the laughter and saw a man standing in the sky. His body was emitting a terrifying aura. Wang Zhan. Wang Zhan looked towards the south and said with a smile, "Small grotto heaven, I'm getting impatient. Why don't we fight today?" Li Xiran, who was standing next to Yi Xian, said with a smile, "This Wang Zhan is really hot-tempered." Yi Xian turned towards the south and said, "Will the small grotto heaven accept the challenge?" Li Xiran said in a deep voice, "After being challenged like this, I believe they will accept the challenge." Right at this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Wang Zhan. The old man glanced at Wang Zhan and said calmly, "We've agreed to fight tomorrow, so let's do it tomorrow. Why are you in such a hurry?" Wang Zhan laughed, "I'm just thinking that since we're already here, why wait until tomorrow? Let's fight to the death now." The old man looked at Wang Zhan and said, "Sure." As he spoke, he turned around and saw a man walking out from not far away. The man wore a simple gray robe, his hair was tied behind his head, and he held a sheathed saber in his hand. Yi Xian turned to look at Li Xiran, who was standing next to him. Li Xiran shook his head, "I've never seen him before." Yi Xian frowned slightly as he looked at the man. He couldn't sense the man's aura. "It's strange," Dao Yi said softly. "He's not simple." Yi Xian nodded. He could sense Wang Zhan's aura, but he couldn't sense the man's. Right at this moment, the saint of the small grotto heaven suddenly said, "Let my small grotto heaven deal with one thing first." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian below. "My small grotto heaven wants to kill this person first." Right at this moment, Yi Xian flicked his thumb lightly. The old man's head was sent flying. Everyone present was dumbfounded. Yi Xian looked around and said, "Kill me?" As he spoke, he shook his head slightly. "Let your small grotto heaven's old ancestor do it. Call your old ancestor." Everyone was speechless. P.S. Thank you to the alliance leader of One French Fry Friend for tipping. I'm really ashamed that I only saw it now. There are also many readers who tipped and voted for me. Thank you for your support. To be honest, although my updates are stable, there aren't many. I'll reflect on myself. Thank you all for your support. I'll read it every day. I really want to thank all the readers who silently supported me. Some of the readers only voted for me and didn't even post anything. Some of them didn't even speak. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 1795. Instant Annihilation. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. That old man was a saint. Even though he was only a minor saint, he was still a saint. He was instantly annihilated just like that. Most importantly, many of them hadn't even seen how the old man had died. His sword was too swift. The man from the minor abode turned around to look at Yi Xian, and no one knew what he was thinking. Wang Zhan glanced at Yi Xian as well, and he was slightly shocked in his heart. That attack from Yi Xian just now was truly swift, and it was swift to the point of posing a threat to him. He wasn't simple at all. Yi Xian raised his head to look at Wang Zhan, and then he grinned. "Brother Wang, we meet again." Wang Zhan smiled. "Brother Ye's sword is so swift." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "It isn't that my sword is swift, but the saints of the minor abode are truly too weak." The expressions of the experts from the minor abode instantly became unsightly when they heard this. "That's an insult to the minor abode." A middle-aged man from the shadows spoke softly. "This kid is even stronger than before." It was the palace master of Great Spiritual God Palace, Lin Jiang. The hall master of the enforcement hall, Yanxi, was by his side. There was a trace of fear in Yanxi's eyes as he gazed at Yi Xian. "He's much stronger." That attack from Yi Xian just now was so swift that even he felt quite fearful. Lin Jiang suddenly said, "The enmity between him and the minor abode is growing bigger and bigger." Yanxi said, "But he doesn't care at all. Looks like his background isn't simple at all." Lin Jiang spoke indifferently, "Let's wait and see." Right at this moment, a white-haired old man suddenly appeared not too far away from Yi Xian. As soon as the old man appeared, the space in the surroundings trembled slightly, and then it started to become more and more ethereal. "A great saint." The white-haired old man gazed at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, do you think the people behind you can protect you?" Yi Xian smiled. "Aren't the two of you going to have a battle today? Why don't you fight first?" We'll settle our problems after the competition. Meanwhile, Wang Zhan suddenly smiled and said, Brother Yi is right. As he spoke, he looked at the white-haired old man. Geezer, let's fight first. The white-haired old man was expressionless. Since you want to die so much, I'll fulfill your wish. As he spoke, he looked at the young man at the side. Situ, kill him. The young man slowly walked towards Wang Zhan and slowly placed his left hand on the hilt of his saber. In the distance, Wang Zhan heard Zhu Xiao's voice in his mind, Don't be careless. Wang Zhan laughed. Come. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly leaped up and smashed his fist down towards the young man. Rumble. This punch was like a thunderclap and the entire ancient star city started to collapse. Countless people in the city were shocked. Beside Yi Xian, Xiao An's face instantly turned pale. She hurriedly turned her head to the right. Yi Xian rubbed her little head lightly. Your big brother will be fine. Xiao An held tightly onto Yi Xian's hand with her left hand and spoke with a trembling voice. Big brother Yi Xian. He's so terrifying. Yi Xian looked up into the sky. Wang Zhan's punch had exceeded the scope of their understanding. On the other hand, the man called Situ's expression was extraordinarily calm when facing Wang Zhan's punch. When Wang Zhan's punch arrived before him, he suddenly took a step forward, drew his saber and slashed. His saber was swift like a bolt of lightning. Bang! As a wave of saber light erupted, Wang Zhan instantly retreated explosively by 3 kilometers. Seeing this, Yi Xian, who was below, frowned. Situ's saber Dao had attained the descent realm. Moreover, Situ was a great saint. Right at this moment, the battle pavilion's master, Zhou Xian, appeared in the sky. As soon as Zhou Xian appeared, the white-haired old man from the small abode appeared as well. Zhou Xian stared fixedly at Situ with a gloomy expression. The white-haired old man spoke indifferently. What? We've only exchanged a single blow, yet your battle pavilion can't help but bully the weak? Zhou Xian gazed at the white-haired old man and was about to speak when Wang Zhan spoke abruptly. Pavilion master, I'm fine. Zhou Xian spoke solemnly. He's not simple. Wang Zhan smiled. So what? I, Wang Zhan, fear no one in the younger generation. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. Bang! An afterimage shot straight at Situ. In an instant, the space before Situ was set ablaze. Meanwhile, Situ slowly closed his eyes, and he suddenly drew his saber when Wang Zhan appeared around 3 m away from him. A wave of saber light erupted. Bang! Wang Zhan retreated another few kilometers. He was suppressed. Zhu Xiao's face fell when he witnessed this scene. Wang Zhan had been suppressed twice in a row. At this moment he felt slightly regretful. If Wang Zhan died, then it would be a huge loss to the battle pavilion. The white-haired old man from the small abode suddenly laughed coldly and ridiculed. What? Pavilion Master Zhu doesn't have confidence in your own genius? Zhu Xiao's expression was terrifyingly gloomy. Suddenly Wang Zhan laughed ferociously. It's not over yet. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly soared into the sky, and a powerful force swept out from within him. The force was like a tsunami as it smashed down towards Situ as if it intended to tear him apart. Situ's expression was still calm. When Wang Zhan's force arrived a few meters away from him, a powerful force suddenly surged out from within him. Everyone watched as the force slashed through Wang Zhan's force, and it smashed straight towards Wang Zhan with irresistible force. A wisp of ferocity flashed through Wang Zhan's eyes, and then he suddenly smashed his fist forward. Rumble. The white-haired old man's face had turned gloomy. Yi Xian's sword was even swifter than Situ's saber. A trace of a solemn expression appeared in Situ's eyes as well. How swift! Yi Xian said with a smile. Again. Situ was about to attack, but his pupils suddenly constricted. He'd just drawn his saber when a sword had stabbed right into the center of his forehead. It was an instant kill. The expressions of everyone here had changed. It was too swift. It wasn't flashy at all, it was just swift. At this moment, Situ wasn't dead yet, but his soul and consciousness had been locked onto by Yi Xian's sword. The flying sword hold. He'd combined the flying sword with the soul hold technique. Suddenly, the white-haired old man roared furiously, "How dare you!" As he spoke, he was about to attack. However, his pupils suddenly constricted and he was just about to dodge when a sword stabbed right into his head. A strand of blood sprayed from the back of his head. Everyone here was stunned, including the white-haired old man himself. He was a great saint. But he'd actually been instantly killed by a single strike? The eyes of everyone here were filled with fear, including Zhu Xiao and the others. Yi Xian's sword was truly too swift. Situ's saber was very swift as well, but it was like a child before Yi Xian's sword. Their speeds weren't on the same level at all. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had arrived in front of Situ. Situ gazed at Yi Xian in silence. Suddenly, an anxious voice resounded from afar. "Brother Yi, he's from the god's graveyard. You can't kill him. You absolutely can't." Yi Xian turned around and saw a woman tearing through space towards him. It was exactly Xiaolin Lang. The white-haired old man who still hadn't died spoke ferociously. "Yi Xian, he's from the god's graveyard. If you kill him, then even the supreme laws might not be able to protect you." Yi Xian suddenly slashed with his sword. Situ's head flew into the air, directly erased. Yi Xian turned to look at the white-haired elder. "The necropolis of the gods? Can you take one of my swords?" The white-haired elder was dumbfounded. Yi Xian looked at Xiaolin Lang and asked, "Kill the small caves." Xiaolin Lang shook her head. "It's the Godslayer's cemetery." Yi Xian smiled. "Can you tell me more about the graveyard of the gods?" After a moment of silence, Xiaolin Lang said, "It's an extremely terrifying place. It's even more terrifying than the ruins of Sword Sect. We still dared to go to the ruins of Sword Sect, but we don't even dare to go to the graveyard of the gods." Yi Xian asked softly, "Is it that mysterious?" Xiaolin Lang nodded. "It's mysterious and powerful." With that, she looked at Yi Xian with a complicated look in her eyes. "I was really being impulsive." Yi Xian said with a smile, "I want to kill you. It was difficult for me to retract my sword." Xiaolin Lang said softly, "Brother Yi is much stronger than I imagined." Yi Xian laughed and said, "Miss Lin Lang, how much do you know about the graveyard of the gods?" Xiaolin Lang shook her head. "I don't know much, but there's a place that I should know a lot about." Yi Xian asked, "What place?" Xiaolin Lang said in a low voice, "Xiaolu." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Xiaolu?" Xiaolin Lang nodded. "It's also a somewhat mysterious place." With that, she pointed with her finger, and a white light entered the space between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Xiaolin Lang withdrew her finger and said, "This is the address to Xiaolu. However, young master, Yi should be mentally prepared. That place is very dark. If you want to obtain information, you'll have to pay a huge price." Yi Xian smiled. "Understood." Xiaolin Lang said, "Brother Yi, I still have things to do, so I'll be taking my leave." With that, she turned around and disappeared into the horizon. At this moment, Zhu Xiao walked over with Wang Zhan. Zhu Xiao cupped his fists at Yi Xian. "Young Master Yi, thank you for today." These words of thanks were sincere and sincere. If it weren't for Yi Xian, Wang Zhan would have died. And that would be an unbearable loss for the battle pavilion. Nurturing a Wang Zhan was not an easy task. Yi Xian smiled. "There's no need to thank me. Brother Wang and I are friends." Wang Zhan glanced at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. Yi Xian said, "Brother Wang, today's setback isn't a bad thing. What do you think?" Wang Zhan nodded. "There's always someone better out there." Yi Xian laughed. "It won't be long before Brother Wang Zhan's strength reaches new heights." A smile appeared on Zhu Xiao's face as well. Today's defeat wasn't a bad thing for Wang Zhan. Wang Zhan no longer had any arrogance in his heart. To Wang Zhan, today's setback was equivalent to a rebirth. Zhu Xiao suddenly said, "Little friend Yi will be taking our leave." Yi Xian nodded. "Take care." Wang Zhan cupped his fists. "Brother Yi, take care." With that, he, Zhu Xiao, and the rest of the battle pavilion experts disappeared. At this time, Li Shiran also said, "Brother Yi, I'm going back too." Yi Xian looked at Li Shiran. With a tap of his finger, a spatial ring landed in front of Li Shiran. Li Shiran's expression changed drastically when he glanced at it. There were a total of 100,000 fortune divine crystals in the spatial ring. Li Shiran looked at Yi Xian in astonishment. "Brother Yi, this is?" Yi Xian smiled. "The outer disciple's salary is small, keep it." Li Shiran shook his head. "No. I can't take it." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Take it. This is not charity. I treat you as a friend. Do you understand what I mean?" Li Xiran was silent. Yi Xian smiled. Don't be so wishy-washy. Take it quickly. All right. He took out another spatial ring and handed it to Li Xiran. This is my gift to Elder Gu Qing. Give it to him for me. After a moment of silence, Li Xiran said, Brother Yi, how good would it be if you were still in the outer disciples? Yi Xian laughed. Li Xiran did not say anything else. He kept the two spatial rings. Brother Yi will meet again. After saying that, he disappeared into the horizon. Around them, the experts that came from other places also left. Yi Xian's name spread like a plague across the heavens. Instant kill of a great sage. The current Yi Xian could be said to be the #1 prodigy in the heavens. Small grotto heaven. Beside the lake, in front of the small grotto heaven lord, a shadow was whispering something. After a long time, the old man said softly, Instant kill of a great sage? The shadow nodded. The speed of this person's flying sword is unprecedented. It's terrifying. The old man narrowed his eyes. A cold light flashed in his eyes. When did he become so terrifying? The shadow shook his head. He wasn't this terrifying before. After he came out of the mausoleum of swords, his strength became so terrifying. The old man said in a low voice. He had a fortuitous encounter there. The shadow nodded. I think so. The old man fell silent for a long time. We can't let him live. The shadow nodded. He has already matured. If we allow him to continue growing, the consequences will be unimaginable. The old man suddenly said, What did the god's graveyard say? The shadow shook his head. They haven't responded yet. The old man said, Yi Xian killed Situ. They won't let it go. Of course, we are responsible for this as well. He paused for a moment before he said, Ask second brother Li to go there. Ask him to bring a few more people. The shadow hesitated for a moment before he said, This person already has the strength to instantly kill a great sage. The old man glanced at the shadow. I don't believe that he can even kill second brother Li. Just ask them to be careful. The shadow nodded. All right. After saying that, he turned and left. After the shadow left, the old man fell silent for a long time. After a long time, he suddenly stood up and walked towards the distance. It didn't take long for the old man to arrive at the peak of a mountain. There was a luxurious palace there, and there was only a single statue in the palace. A statue of a woman. This woman was the supreme law of the world. And this statue had been built by the ancestors of the small abode. The old man walked to the statue in the palace and bowed slightly to it with an extremely respectful expression. He would come here every once in a while to pay his respects. The supreme law of the universe. This was the faith of the small abode. After a long time, the old man bowed again. Supreme, please bless my small abode for 10,000 years. After Yi Xian left the ancient star region with Dao Yi and Shaoan, he arrived at a lake according to the address Xiao Linlang had given him. There was a small pavilion by the lake. The pavilion was built by the lake. It wasn't large, but it was very exquisite. A small pavilion. When Yi Xian and the others arrived not far from the pavilion, a woman in a green dress came to greet them. The woman in the green dress bowed slightly to Yi Xian. You must be young Master Yi? Yi Xian looked at the woman and smiled. You knew I was coming. The woman nodded. Master said young Master Yi would come. Yi Xian smiled. Your master is very resourceful. Does your master know why I'm here? The woman smiled. Master said young Master Yi is here to inquire about God's graveyard. Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The woman shook her head. Yi Xian smiled. What do you mean by shaking your head? The woman looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, Master means that young Master Yi is too late. Yi Xian was puzzled. What do you mean? The woman said, in the entire ancient God star sector and outside of it, there is no force that can compare to God's graveyard. In other words, young Master Yi, you will die for sure. Yi Xian blinked. This is what your master said. The woman nodded. Yes. Yi Xian smiled. I understand. Having said that, he looked at Dao Yi. Let's go. Dao Yi nodded slightly. He took Shaoan and left with Yi Xian. After a few steps, the woman behind Yi Xian suddenly said, Young Master Yi. Yi Xian stopped and turned to look at the woman. The woman said, Young Master Yi, you know nothing about God's graveyard. When you come into contact with them, all your confidence will vanish and only fear will remain. Now death is getting closer and closer to you. Can you feel it? Xian was speechless. P.S. You know nothing about the use of monthly tickets. Do you know what monthly tickets are for? Monthly tickets can be exchanged for bonuses. But in your hands you can't exchange them. But I can. So, do you understand? Chapter 1797. Needless to say, Xian was speechless at this moment. This woman is saying that I will definitely die. Without a word, Xian left with Dao Yi and Shaoan. At this time the woman said, "Young Master Yi." Xian suddenly raised his middle finger. "Get lost." With that he disappeared into the distance with Dao Yi and Shaoan. Behind him, the woman watched Xian and the other two leave with a calm expression. On the other side, Dao Yi said, "This god's graveyard is not simple." Xian smiled. "Let's not bother about them." Dao Yi nodded. "What's your plan now?" Xian looked at the sky. "If I'm not wrong, the people from the small cave heaven are coming for me." Dao Yi looked at Xian. "This time the people from the small cave heaven are coming for me." Xian said, "I know." Dao Yi asked, "Can you handle it yourself?" Xian laughed. "With the sword in my hand I am invincible." Dao Yi patted Xian's head. "Have you forgotten how miserable you were in the past?" Xian was speechless. Dao Yi said, "I know you are strong and you will not underestimate your enemy. But you still have to be careful, understand?" Xian nodded. "I know." He would not underestimate his enemy. He had not reached the level of Qing and his father who could look down on everyone in the world. As if he thought of something, Xian said, "Are you going back to the great spiritual palace?" Dao Yi nodded. "There are many things I want to learn from them." As she said that, she glanced at Xian, smiled and said, "Let her follow me." Dao Yi nodded. "She's not simple. I can't let her follow me. It's best if she follows you." Xian nodded. He took out a storage ring and handed it to Dao Yi. "For you." Dao Yi glanced at Xian and accepted the gift. Xian was a little speechless. "Aren't you going to see what it is?" Dao Yi replied, "There's no need for that." Xian shook his head and smiled. "Then take care. If anyone bullies you in the great spiritual god palace, contact me." Dao Yi looked at Xian. And then, Xian blinked his eyes. "I will destroy the great spiritual god palace." Dao Yi shook his head and laughed. "You're very arrogant now." With that she turned around and left. Xian suddenly said, "Don't let yourself be bullied." Dao Yi waved her hand lightly. "I know." After saying that she disappeared. Shaoan turned to look at Xian. "Brother Xian, where are we going now?" Xian smiled. "I have something to do." With that he took out the Qingxian sword and was about to leave with Shaoan. At that moment, a terrifying aura suddenly swept down from the sky. "It's here." Xian turned to look at Shaoan and said with a smile, "Let's go and play with Xiaota first." With that he put Shaoan into Xiaota's body. At that moment, an old man appeared not far away from Xian. The old man had his hands behind his back. He stood straight and his eyes were extremely sharp. "Great sage." The old man was Old Li from the small grotto heaven. Behind Li Lao Air there were 3 people. All of them were great sages. Old Li looked at Xian. "I heard that you can kill great sages in seconds." Just as he said this, his pupils suddenly shrank and his right arm suddenly blocked in front of him. Bang! An expanse of sword light shattered as second brother Li retreated explosively by over 1 kilometer. As soon as he stopped moving, the layer of golden armor on his right arm shattered into pieces. Seeing that, if this chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. Old Li's expression became extremely serious. However, at that moment, another sword radiance slashed at him. It was so fast that it could not be seen by the naked eye. Old Li's expression changed drastically. He quickly raised his left arm to block. Bang! Another wave of sword light erupted, and Old Li's second brother was forced to retreat repeatedly. In the distance, Xian slowly walked towards Li Lao Air. He did not make a move, but Li Lao Air retreated rapidly. Because one after another the flying swords slashed at Old Li. The speed of the flying swords was too fast. They were so fast that Old Li could not dodge them and could only block them. At that moment he could only block them with his physical body. No, he could only block them with the relic armor he was wearing. Just like that, Yi Xian walked toward Old Li slowly. With every step he took, Old Li retreated hundreds of feet away. At the side, the other two great sages were dumbfounded. Just as they were about to attack, two flying swords slashed at them and sent them flying. They did not even have the strength to fight back. Fast. Yi Xian's flying swords were not particularly powerful, but they were fast. After Yi Xian had taken 10 steps, the divine armor on Li Lao Er's body directly exploded, and almost in an instant, a sword directly stabbed into his chest. Defeated. He did not even have the time to attack. Old Li raised his head and looked at Yi Xian in the distance. His eyes were filled with disbelief. You? Yi Xian walked to Old Li's front and took out the green mysterious sword. He raised his hand and slashed. The green mysterious sword sank into Old Li's forehead. In an instant, Old Li's soul was absorbed. After absorbing Old Li's soul, the green mysterious sword trembled violently. Xiao Hun said excitedly, "Young master, this sword is very nourishing." Yi Xian smiled. "Xiao Hun, how long will it take for you to break through?" Xiao Hun thought for a moment and said, "I need to devour at least 100 experts of this level before I can break through." 100 great sages. Yi Xian was speechless. Were there 100 great sages in a few super forces? They could not possibly slaughter the entire ancient god star field. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Xiao Hun, can you devour those artifact spirits?" Xiao Hun said, "I think so." Yi Xian said, "Devour Xiao Ta." "I think if you devour him you will definitely break through immediately." Xiao Hun. Xiao Ta suddenly jumped up. "Damn, young master, you are not human." Yi Xian laughed. Of course he was joking. However, if Xiao Hun really devoured Xiao Ta, he might really break through. Of course he would not dare. His father would definitely skin him alive. There was still a little gap between him and Dad. He could not fight Dad head-on. At this time Xiao Hun suddenly said, "Young master, can you use me next time to kill someone?" Yi Xian smiled. "Why, you want to kill someone?" Xiao Hun said excitedly, "Yes." Yi Xian laughed. "I want to hide and nurture the sword." The sword was the green mysterious sword, and the sword was also the green mysterious sword. The green mysterious sword and the power of the bloodline were his last trump cards. No, there was also the sword will of Dad. Yi Xian withdrew his thoughts and looked at the other two great sages of the minor heavens in the distance who were locked by his sword light. With a thought, the green mysterious sword directly absorbed the two people. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the green mysterious sword appeared in his hand. The next moment his whole body disappeared. In an instant the space-time in front of Yi Xian split, and the next moment, Yi Xian appeared in a palace hall. Qingqing. Inside the hall, a woman in a dragon robe was reading memorials. "This chapter is not over, please continue." As if sensing something, the woman suddenly looked up. When she saw Yi Xian, the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. This smile made all flowers pale in comparison. The woman was Tuoba Yen. Yi Xian walked up to Tuoba Yen, grabbed his hand and said with a smile, "Did you miss me?" Tuoba Yen said softly, "Didn't you say you would come back once a month? How many months has it been?" Yi Xian gently hugged Tuoba Yen. "It's my fault." Tuoba Yen suddenly said, "Give me a child." Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. Tuoba Yen looked up at Yi Xian, blushing. "Can you do it?" Yi Xian blinked. "Don't you know if I can do it or not?" Tuoba Yen pinched Yi Xian's waist hard and said shyly, "You're asking for a beating." Yi Xian laughed. He carried Tuoba Yen and walked toward the inner hall. In the room, Yi Xian wrapped his arms around Tuoba Yan's slender waist, and his hands slowly moved downwards. It's not suitable to write in detail here, so I've automatically omitted 10,000 words. Everyone fill in the blanks. 5 days later. Early in the morning, Yi Xian lay in front of the stone steps of the hall. A warm sun slowly rose in the sky. The sunlight shone on his body, warm and very comfortable. At this moment, Tuoba Yen walked to Yi Xian's side. At this moment she was no longer wearing the dragon robe, but white pajamas, and her graceful figure was unmistakable. Tuoba Yen sat beside Yi Xian and said softly, "I really want you to stay here." Yi Xian smiled. "I want that too. All these years I'm a little tired of the days of fighting and killing outside. But the current me is not qualified to live an ordinary life." An ordinary life? In times of peace that was not a difficult thing. But in a universe like this, it was too difficult. Did Qing and I do anything wrong back then? We did nothing wrong. But Tendo destroyed the world and countless people died tragically. In troubled times being weak was wrong. Tuoba Yen said softly, I know. But I can't bear to part with you. Yi Xian suddenly smiled. Yen, what do you like about me? Tuoba Yen blinked, then smiled. I like your shamelessness. Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he burst out laughing. Tuoba Yen said softly, will I have children? Yi Xian said with a smile, if you're worried then I'll have to work hard and stay for a few more days. With that he disappeared on the spot with Tuoba Yen. 5 days later Yi Xian left behind a spatial ring and went to Azure Water Academy. He gave Mo Yunqi the soul wood that the swordsman woman, Ai, had given him in the Mausoleum of Swords. Ai only wanted this child to live an ordinary life, and the academy was more suitable for him. At the very least he must have the ability to rely on himself. Yi Xian also stored the cultivation methods, martial techniques and swordsmanship insights that Ai had given him in a storage ring, and he gave this storage ring to Mo Yunqi. The child's future depended on his own choices. After handing over everything Yi Xian left Azure Province. In front of the palace hall, Tuoba Yen looked at the horizon, her eyes filled with reluctance. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in the distance. Your Majesty, everyone is waiting for you to attend court. The reluctance in Tuoba Yen's eyes disappeared. She turned and left. At this moment she became the aloof empress again. Her gentleness was only for Yi Xian. After leaving Azure Province, Yi Xian went straight to the small grotto heaven. He did not like to be passive. He wanted to take the initiative. Didn't your small grotto heaven want to mess with me? Don't look for me. I'll do it myself. End of this chapter. Chapter 1798. Building. A woman in a green dress walked slowly to the front of the building and bowed slightly. Master, we have received news that Yi Xian is going to the small grotto heaven. Small grotto heaven. At this moment the door suddenly opened and a man walked out slowly. The man wore a simple black robe and held a feather fan in his hand. The man smiled. This young Master Yi is going to the small grotto heaven of his own accord. The woman nodded. I think so. The man smiled. There's going to be a good show. The woman stood behind the man respectfully and did not speak. The man looked up at the sky and said softly, Yi Xian is not afraid of the small grotto heaven or the god's graveyard. The person behind him is definitely not ordinary. As he spoke, a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. But I have observed the universe and there is no force that can compare to the god's graveyard. The woman suddenly said, according to our investigation Yi Xian disappeared for a period of time, but we can't find out where he went. The man turned to look at the woman. Even our people can't find him? The woman nodded. He disappeared very strangely. We can't find him even after entering the space-time tunnel. Not only did he disappear strangely but he also appeared strangely. The man frowned slightly. This person is so mysterious. The woman suddenly said again, I have received news that someone came out of the god's graveyard. Hearing this, the man narrowed his eyes. Do you know who it is? The woman shook her head. I don't know yet. But our people are already looking for him. We should be able to find him. The man smiled. Prepare a big gift. If you know his whereabouts, inform me immediately. The woman said in a low voice, Master, you don't think Yi Xian can do it? The man shook his head. It's not that I don't think he can do it, but I think the god's graveyard is better. As he spoke, he gently waved his feather fan and a trace of seriousness flashed in his eyes. This is the god's graveyard. Even the supreme laws of the universe have to show some respect. At this point he turned to look at the woman and said with a smile, Can Yi Xian make the supreme law of the universe give him face? Can he? In just a short while the building's master disappeared with the woman. War Pavilion. Inside the main hall, all the experts had gathered. The master of the War Pavilion, Zhou Xian, said in a deep voice, Yi Xian went to the small grotto heaven. What do you think of this? Everyone fell silent. Zhou Xian looked at Elderly. What do you think? Elderly pondered for a moment and said, The person behind this person is definitely not weaker than the small cave heaven. But we don't know who the person behind him is. This boy is seriously too mysterious. Zhu Xiao turned to look at an old man. Still haven't found out his background? The old man said in a deep voice, we only found one thing. He seems to be related to the swordsman who came to the ancient Godstar region before. Those people are from the All Heavens city, which is very far away from us. They seem to belong to a force called Sword Alliance. Sword Alliance. Zhu Xiao frowned. What kind of force is that? The old man shook his head. I don't know the details, but they don't seem very strong. Those swordsmen are not weak, but most of them are only at the Great Qin realm. Zhu Xiao said after a moment of silence, continue to investigate this Sword Alliance. The old man nodded. Understood. At this moment, Elderly suddenly said, Yi Xian helped the war pavilion before, but now he is looking for the small grotto heaven. What do you think of this? Zhu Xiao said after a moment of silence, if it's just a small grotto heaven, the war pavilion will definitely help. This chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. We will help, but there is still God's graveyard. God's graveyard. Everyone in the main hall was silent. The war pavilion was also afraid of that place. That was the #1 forbidden area. At this moment, Elderly suddenly said, then we can only wait and see. Zhu Xiao nodded. That's the only way. Elderly said again, God's graveyard has sent someone. Should we show our support? Zhu Xiao said after a moment of silence, prepare a big gift. I will deliver it personally. Great Spiritual God Palace. Qin Jiang, the palace master of Great Spiritual God Palace, immediately summoned Yanxi when he learned that Yi Xian was going to the small grotto heaven. Qin Jiang said in a deep voice, what is he trying to do? Yanxi said, based on his personality, I'm afraid he is going to fight to the death with the small grotto heaven. Qin Jiang frowned slightly. But Yanxi said softly, that's the most terrifying thing because we don't know what he is relying on. Qin Jiang said indifferently, the sword in his hand contains the power of the supreme law, and the support of the small grotto heaven is also the supreme law of the universe. Then he sneered. He is seeking his own death. Yanxi glanced at Qin Jiang. Palace Master, do you want him to die? Qin Jiang said after a moment of silence, of course. Yanxi sighed in his heart. Yi Xian's relationship with Great Spiritual God Palace was not very pleasant. Previously, Yi Xian had killed several people from Great Spiritual God Palace, which was quite embarrassing for Great Spiritual God Palace. At this moment, Qin Jiang suddenly said, let's see how he is going to fight to the death with the small grotto heaven. Also, as far as I know, the God's graveyard has also sent someone out. Then he paused and said, prepare a big gift. I want to meet him personally. Don't neglect it. After that, he disappeared on the spot. Sky Demon Kingdom. In a certain luxurious hall, an old man squatted in front of a brazier. Opposite him sat a woman with a whip. The woman wore an animal skin dress. Although it was not as beautiful as a human's dress, it exuded a sense of wildness and had a different kind of elegance. Both of them were roasting meat. The woman turned the wooden stick on the meat. Grandpa, I heard that there is a super monster called Yi Xian recently. This person defeated a genius from the god's graveyard. The old man smiled. Sure wants to fight him? The woman nodded. Yes. The old man thought for a moment and said, he is a swordsman. The woman's lips curled up slightly. Can his sword break through my body? The old man fell silent. The woman glanced at the old man. Grandpa, you know him? The old man nodded. I know Dowie well. This person is not that simple. The woman was even more interested. She tore off a piece of meat and put it in her mouth. Then I want to fight him even more. The old man thought for a moment and said, you can go look for him. But don't become enemies with him. Understand? The woman nodded. Yes. After that she carried the piece of meat and left. The old man suddenly said, aren't you going to leave some for Grandpa? The woman disappeared into the distance without looking back. The old man shook his head and smiled. Foodie. At this moment, a middle-aged man appeared not far away from the old man. The middle-aged man said in a deep voice, Father, what do you think about Yi Xian going to the small grotto heaven? The old man replied indifferently, not really. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before he said, according to what I know, Yi Xian has sent someone out from the god's graveyard. Their target seems to be Yi Xian. The old man remained silent. The middle-aged man said, according to what I know, the great spiritual palace, the battle pavilion, and Xiao Lu have gone to look for that person from the god's graveyard. They want to build a good relationship with him. The old man suddenly said, what do you think of Yi Xian? The middle-aged man fell silent for a moment before he said, a genius. As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and his expression changed slightly. Father, don't tell me you intend to stand on his side? The old man said indifferently, are you afraid? The middle-aged man hurriedly nodded. Father, this is not a joke. If we choose to stand on Yi Xian's side, then it's equivalent to becoming enemies with the small grotto heaven and the god's graveyard. I'm afraid we can't bear the consequences. The old man remained expressionless. So, you want to stand on the small grotto heaven and the god's graveyard? The middle-aged man spoke in a low voice. The small grotto heaven is fine, but I think that we have to make friends with the god's graveyard. The old man gazed at the middle-aged man. What do you think of Yi Xian? He asked again. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before he said, he's a monstrous genius. The old man stared at the middle-aged man. What else? The middle-aged man laughed bitterly. Father, just speak your mind. The old man sighed softly. Do you know why I haven't passed on the throne to you? The middle-aged man spoke in a low voice. Father isn't satisfied with me. The old man said, I'm very dissatisfied with you. It wasn't easy for our Sky Demon Kingdom to develop to its current scale. Our Sky Demon Kingdom is very strong, but that's exactly why we have to be even more careful. Let me ask you, why did Yi Xian dare to go to the small grotto heaven? The middle-aged man said. He had something to rely on. The old man continued. Why did he dare to kill someone from the god's graveyard? Was it because he was ignorant? The middle-aged Nji's expression gradually turned solemn. He isn't afraid of the god's graveyard. The old man nodded. That's the main point. Yi Xian isn't afraid of the god's graveyard at all. As he spoke, he slowly clenched his right hand. This person can instantly kill a great saint. Think about it, can an ordinary person or an ordinary force nurture such a genius? The middle-aged man fell silent. The old man continued, the god's graveyard is very strong, but can this Yi Xian be any weaker? The middle-aged man said in a low voice, make friends with Yi Xian? The old man shook his head. The middle-aged man was stunned. The old man suddenly spoke again, make friends with both sides. You go see the people from the god's graveyard, I'll go see this Yi Xian. The middle-aged man, the old man stood up and left. When he reached the door he said, we'll only be friends, not enemies. They can fight their battles, we'll fight ours. With that he disappeared. Inside the hall, the middle-aged man smiled bitterly. In an unknown mountain range, a sword light suddenly descended. The sword light dissipated, and Yi Xian appeared at the top of a mountain. At this moment, an angry shout suddenly sounded from afar. Who dares to trespass into my small grotto heaven? As the voice fell, the space in front of Yi Xian suddenly split open and an old man walked out. The old man looked at Yi Xian. Who are you? What are you doing in my small grotto heaven? The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. Yi Xian. As he spoke he paused, then said, I'm here. Tuzong. P.S. Asking for votes. End of this chapter. Chapter 1799. Tuzong. As soon as these words were spoken, the old man was instantly infuriated, and he was just about to speak when a ray of light flashed through his throat. Before the old man could react, his head flew into the air along with a wisp of blood. Instant kill. After killing the old man, Yi Xian walked towards the grotto heaven. During this time, numerous powerful auras shot towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian kept walking into the distance with a calm look on his face. And with every step he took, a bloody head would fly into the sky in the distance. A flying sword with every step he took and a head with every flying sword. In less than 10 breaths of time, more than 10 heads fell from the sky. Some of them were minor saints. They were all instant kills. No one could stop Yi Xian's flying sword. The experts that had rushed over in secret were extremely shocked when they witnessed this scene. It was too terrifying. Even a great saint couldn't stop Yi Xian's flying sword. The great spiritual palace master stared at Yi Xian. Why is his flying sword so fast? Yanxi shook his head. I don't know. Looking at Yi Xian, the fear in the depths of the great spiritual divine palace's eyes became more and more intense. So did their killing intent. The speed of Yi Xian's flying sword was too terrifying. In the distance, Yi Xian had arrived at the other side of a mountain. During this time, no one came out to stop him. When Yi Xian stopped, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Kujia! Someone exclaimed in the dark. Kujia! He was the guardian of the grotto heaven. No one had expected that the grotto heaven would send out a guardian. However, it was normal. Ordinary people weren't a match for Yi Xian. Even a great saint couldn't stop Yi Xian's flying sword. Kujia looked at Yi Xian. You came to Tuzong? Yi Xian smiled. Do you have a problem with that? Kujia looked Yi Xian in the eye. Let me see you. Just as he finished speaking, a flying sword suddenly slashed towards him. Kujia raised his right arm. Boom. A streak of sword light shattered as Kujia retreated 1,000 feet. However, he forcibly blocked Yi Xian's flying sword. Yi Xian glanced at Kujia's right arm. Under his right sleeve there was a dark arm guard. Another divine item. Yi Xian shook his head. I look down on people who use external objects the most. How boring. Xiao Ta. In the distance, Kujia glanced at his bracer and there was a deep gash on it. A trace of seriousness appeared in his eyes. If it wasn't for this bracer, he might have been instantly killed just now. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly took another step forward. Kujia immediately raised his arm to block. Boom. When the sword light appeared, Kujia retreated another 1,000 feet. As soon as he stopped, another flying sword slashed at him. Boom. Kujia retreated another 1,000 feet. Just like that, every time Yi Xian took a step forward, Kujia would retreat 100 feet. The countless gazes in the surroundings had become extremely solemn when they witnessed this scene. This was too terrifying. Kujia was not an ordinary great sage. He was a veteran great sage who had become a great sage tens of thousands of years ago. This was a true great sage. However, even such a super expert was not a match for Yi Xian. He was hung up and beaten by Yi Xian. Finally, when Yi Xian took the 10th step, the bracer on Kujia's right arm exploded, and at practically the same time, a flying sword slashed straight towards him. Kujia's pupils shrank and he stamped his right foot down. Condense. As his voice fell, the space around him suddenly condensed into a spatial barrier. Not only that, there was also a temporal dimensional barrier. At this moment, the area where Kujia was located was practically impregnable. However, under everyone's gaze, Yi Xian's sword landed on his right arm. Kujia's right arm flew into the air. It was like the spatial barrier and temporal barrier didn't exist at all. The eyes of countless experts in the surroundings were filled with disbelief when they witnessed this scene. Why is Yi Xian's flying sword able to disregard both space and time? Kujia's eyes were filled with disbelief as well. Right at this moment, a flying sword suddenly slashed towards him. It was extremely swift and he didn't even have the time to react before it was already standing on his head. Bang! Kujia was pushed over 1 kilometer back. However, he didn't die, because a ray of dark golden light had obstructed Yi Xian's flying sword. Yi Xian frowned when he witnessed this scene. You're using external forces again. Don't you think it's shameful to use external forces? Kujia stared fixedly at Yi Xian, and the fear in his eyes had transformed into a trace of terror. Yi Xian's flying sword is too terrifying. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward. This step caused Kujia's expression to instantly change drastically, and he was just about to strike with his fist. However, he was still too late. A flying sword had slashed down directly against his head. Bang! Light erupted from the sword and then Kujia was pushed over 1 kilometer back. However, he just retreated when numerous flying swords slashed down towards him. Bang! 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 Kujia retreated explosively. When he'd retreated for an entire 30 kilometers, the dark barrier of light around him had suddenly shattered, and a sword had pierced through the space between his brows at practically the exact same moment. Kujia's figure instantly became illusory. Everyone here was stunned. He's dead. A great saint has perished just like that. Kujia, who hadn't died yet, stared fixedly at Zhou Xian. Who exactly are you? At this moment he finally realized that they'd been underestimating Zhou Xian all along. They'd greatly underestimated him. Earlier they'd even sent some mortal severing realm experts to kill Zhou Xian. Now that he thought about it, it was truly too laughable. Zhou Xian walked over to Kujia and gazed at him. I'm Zhou Xian. As soon as he finished speaking, he withdrew the green profound sword and stabbed it into Kujia's body. Bang! At the instant that the green profound sword entered Kujia's body, Kujia's expression instantly changed drastically, and his eyes were filled with terror. He swiftly turned around to look towards the direction of the heaven abode. He wanted to say something, but he didn't have the chance. The green profound sword had directly absorbed his soul. It was completely gone. Zhou Xian put the green profound sword away and continued forward. Right at this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Zhou Xian. Bang! In an instant the space around Zhou Xian had started to burn. Zhou Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. As the sword slashed down, a wave of sword radiance instantly shattered the flames, and he himself was forced to retreat several hundred feet away. After stopping, Zhou Xian looked at the old man. At this moment Xiao Linlong's voice suddenly rang out in his mind. This person is the cave master of the heaven abode, Mu Su. He reached the great sage level hundreds of thousands of years ago, and now he's even more unfathomable. The cave master had come out. Zhou Xian looked at Mu Su and smiled. So you're the one who's been chasing after me and trying to kill me? Mu Su looked at Zhou Xian coldly. I admit that I've underestimated you. Zhou Xian laughed out loud. I have no grudges with your small grotto heaven, but your small grotto heaven kept chasing after me. As he spoke, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. You don't have to chase after me everywhere, I'll do it myself. Right now I, Zhou Xian, am standing in front of your heaven abode. I, Zhou Xian, beg for your life. Beg for his life. His voice was like thunder shaking the heavens. Someone was begging for his life in front of the heaven abode. Muxuhi stared at Zhou Xian. As you wish. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. In the distance, Zhou Xian shifted his consciousness, and a flying sword slashed towards Mu Su. Mu Su, on the other hand, did not dodge and allowed the flying sword to strike his chest. Bang! Space instantly shattered into pieces, but Mu Su was completely unharmed. At the same time he'd appeared in front of Zhou Xian, and then he smashed his fist towards Zhou Xian. With this punch, the space around Zhou Xian instantly ignited. Zhou Xian did not retreat. He rushed forward, drew his sword and slashed. Draw the sword to decide life and death. As soon as the sword was drawn, a wave of sword light swept out from Zhou Xian's scabbard like a tide. Rumble. A world-shaking explosion resounded as both Zhou Xian and Mu Su retreated explosively at the same time. As they retreated, countless flying swords struck Mu Su, but Mu Shui was completely unharmed. After he stopped moving, Zhou Xian gazed at Mu Su, and he noticed that there was a palm-sized black mirror on Mu Su's chest. His flying sword had been stopped by this black mirror. Meanwhile, Xiao Linlong's voice resounded once more in his mind. This is the heavenly abode mirror, and there's an abode within it. It's the number one precious treasure of the minor abode. It's a superb ancient god-ranked treasure. A divine treasure. Zhou Xian instantly flared up with rage when he heard this, and he gazed at Mu Su. How shameless. It's fine if you're bullying the weak, but you're actually using an external treasure. How shameless of you to even use an external object. As he spoke, he glanced at the surroundings. Does everyone think he's shameless? The others were speechless. Mu Su's expression was extremely unsightly. He wanted to be shameless as well. However, the flying sword's speed was so terrifying that even he wasn't confident that he could block it. That wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that Zhou Xian didn't expend much effort to send out these flying swords, and he could send out as many as he wanted. Even if he blocked one flying sword, what about the second and third? He had no choice but to use an external treasure. At this moment, Zhou Xian suddenly looked at Mu Su. Do you dare not use an external treasure? Let's have a fair fight. Mu Su stared fixedly at Zhou Xian. Why should I not use an external treasure? Zhou Xian said angrily. I'm only at the Heaven Ascension realm. What about you? You're already a great saint. How many realms higher are you than me? But now we're fighting one-on-one and you still want to use an external treasure? Doesn't your conscience hurt? Musu's expression grew increasingly unsightly, and he couldn't help but curse. Heaven Ascension Realm. You're only at the Heaven Ascension Realm? Which Heaven Ascension Realm cultivator is like you? You can kill a great saint at the drop of a hat. In fact, he was also extremely puzzled. This guy was indeed only at the Heaven Ascension Realm. But why was he so terrifying? Not only Musu but everyone present was puzzled. This was killing someone who was several realms above him. At this moment Xian still wanted to say something, but Musu suddenly said, Xian, don't talk nonsense. If I use an external treasure you can use it too. Xian stared at Musu. I usually don't use external treasures. Musu looked coldly at Xian. Don't you want to be fair? Isn't it fair if you use an external treasure? Come on, use an external treasure. After a moment of silence Xian said, I don't think it's good to use external treasures. Let's have a fair fight. Musu said angrily, if you use an external treasure, then it's a fair fight, quickly use it. Xian nodded, as you wish. As he spoke, the sword in his hand turned into the green profound sword and he casually swung it. A sword light directly slashed at Musu's chest. Boom. The heavenly abode mirror directly turned into nothingness, and at the same time Musu's physical body also disappeared in an instant, and the green profound sword was already stabbed into his chest. Everyone present was petrified. Musu looked at Xian in a daze. Your external treasure is so strong. Chapter 1800. He was instantly killed. Everyone in the surroundings was petrified. Even Qinjiang and the others from the great spiritual divine palace were stunned on the spot, and their minds were blank. Why would Musu need anyone? He was the current master of the small heaven, the peak of the great saint realm, the kind that didn't rely on anything. But now he was instantly killed by Xian with a single strike of his sword. The scene in front of him was as unreal as a dream. Actually, Xian was quite shocked as well. It was the first time he had used the azure sword. He hadn't expected the azure sword to be so terrifying. Not only did he destroy an ancient god-rank super treasure with a single strike, but he had also instantly killed Musu. That was too terrifying. Moreover, he hadn't executed any sword technique just now. It was just a casual strike. If he had executed the sword of life and death or the flying sword technique. After all, the azure sword was more suitable to be used as a flying sword than the spacetime sword. Suddenly Musu, who was still alive, spoke with a trembling voice. That's impossible. Xian looked at Musu with a helpless expression. I didn't want to use external objects, but I had no choice. You forced me to use them. See, now you're in an awkward situation. The battle is over in an instant. How boring. Everyone was speechless. Musu roared furiously. That's impossible. Your sword. Xian interrupted Musu. Nothing is impossible. Summon the ancestor. Summon the ancestor. The expressions of everyone here had become strange. Is he going to fight the ancestor of the small heaven? That's not a great saint, but a true ancient god realm expert. Suddenly Shaolin Long's voice resounded in Xian's mind. Young Master Yi, the ancestor of the small heaven, is a true ancient god realm expert. A great saint can't compare to such an expert. Don't underestimate him. Xian turned to look at her and smiled. Thank you for your kindness, but I can only fight ancient god realm masters now, can't I? Shaolin Lang fell silent. Great saint? Even if Xian didn't use that terrifying sword in his hand, he would still be able to kill him instantly. If he used that sword, the great sage would be like an ant in front of Xian. Only an ancient god realm master was qualified to be Xian's opponent. Right at this moment Xian suddenly gazed at Musu and said, It's fine if you don't want to summon your ancestor. Just watch and see how I slaughter your tiny abode. With that said, he took a step forward. With this step, more than a dozen flying swords suddenly flew down in all directions. Chi 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 chi. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 bloody heads shot up into the sky. Slaughter the sect. The expressions of the experts in the surroundings changed when they witnessed this scene. When Xian said that he wanted to slaughter the sect, it was not a joke. He really wanted to slaughter the sect. Slaughter the small grotto heavens. In the small cave, how could those experts resist Xian's flying swords? As soon as Xian issued a command, countless experts in the small cave were killed. Musu's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. and he roared furiously, "Yi Xian! Don't you dare!" Yi Xian did not pay any attention to Musu. He took another step forward, and a beam of sword light flew down and went straight into the small cave below. A single flying sword instantly killed over a dozen experts. Those ordinary experts in the small cave didn't even have the chance to dodge before Yi Xian's flying sword. They were instantly killed. Suddenly, a huge beam of light shot into the sky from the small cave below, and it blasted towards Yi Xian. Formation. Moreover, it wasn't just a single formation. Over a dozen formations were activated at the same time, and more than a dozen beams of light shot towards Yi Xian like sharp arrows. However, these beams of light hadn't even gotten close to Yi Xian before they were slashed into pieces by the flying swords. When the flying swords entered the small cave below, another dozen heads flew into the air. Suddenly, another dozen or so heads flew out. He was suppressing the entire small cave by himself. The experts in the dark had extremely solemn expressions when they witnessed this scene. Is Yi Xian really only at the Heaven Ascension realm? The slaughter continued. Every time Yi Xian took a step forward, a few bloody heads would fly into the air. He was invincible. Qin Jiang, the palace master of the great spiritual god palace, stared fixedly at Yi Xian. At this moment his right hand was trembling. He was both fearful and glad. He was glad that he didn't fight to the death with Yi Xian that day. Otherwise, the great spiritual god palace would be finished. Who could stop Yi Xian? Only an ancient god realm master could do that. A great saint was like an ant before Yi Xian, and they couldn't even withstand a single blow. On the other side, Xiao Linlang was staring at Yi Xian. At the moment she was also extremely shocked. She hadn't expected that Yi Xian's strength would be so strong. At this moment she was curious about the green-robed man. Because Yi Xian was the green-robed man's son. She had seen the green-robed man before but only once. Therefore she didn't know the green-robed man's strength. But now, it seemed that the green-robed man's strength was much stronger than she had imagined. If he wasn't strong, how could he cultivate a monstrous genius like Yi Xian? At this time Musu suddenly roared, "Yi Xian!" Yi Xian stopped and looked at Musu. Musu snarled, "Do you want to die together with us?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "Die together? You're so funny. Didn't you want to kill me first? How did it turn into me wanting to die together with you?" Musu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "You've killed enough." Yi Xian smiled. "Is it a lot?" "No. I don't think it's a lot at all." Yi Xian continued to walk away. "I Yi Xian am a person. If people don't offend me, I won't offend them. If people offend me, I'll definitely kill them. Today I Yi Xian will slaughter this small grotto heaven." As soon as he finished speaking, more than a dozen sword lights slashed down from the sky. In a split second more than a dozen heads flew into the air. Musu suddenly roared, "Then we'll die together." He turned to look at the deepest part of the small grotto heaven. "Summon the ancestors. Summon the ancestors." As soon as he finished speaking, a white light pillar shot up to the sky from the deepest part of the small grotto heaven. Boom! In the depths of the clouds, a giant black vortex suddenly appeared, and in the next moment, a terrifying pressure swept down like a tidal wave. In an instant the entire world was boiling. An ancient god realm master. Below, countless people's faces turned solemn. A true ancient god realm master. Yi Xian raised his head to look at the black vortex. Meanwhile, an old man stepped out slowly from within the black vortex. As soon as the old man's foot descended, the entire world seemed to become illusory. The world here couldn't endure the old man's strength at all. Countless people had solemn expressions on their faces. This was a true ancient god realm master. Countless experts of the small grotto heaven knelt to the old man. "Greetings, ancestor." Even Musu, who wasn't completely dead, bowed deeply. Actually, he didn't really want to summon the ancestors. Because it was the small grotto heaven's final trump card. It would be gone after he used it once. However, he had no choice but to use it. If he didn't, then Yi Xian would really slaughter the entire small grotto heaven. The old man who stood before the black vortex glanced at the surroundings, and a trace of bewilderment flashed through his eyes. It had been too long. Moreover, it was only a strand of his soul. So his memories were slightly blurry. But it didn't take long for the old man's bewilderment to clear up, and he looked down at the small grotto heaven. "Is my small grotto heaven in danger?" Next, Musu hurriedly said, Yes. As he spoke, he turned around and pointed angrily at Zhou Xian. He wants to destroy my small grotto heaven. The old man looked at Zhou Xian and he frowned slightly when he saw Zhou Xian. Heaven Ascension Realm? Heaven Ascension Realm. Musu's expression was slightly unsightly. He's at the Heaven Ascension Realm, but his strength is slightly strange. The old man stared at Zhou Xian for a long time and then he suddenly said, "May I know if you can hold back?" Zhou Xian shook his head and smiled. "I can't." The old man nodded lightly. "Then bring it on." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward. A terrifying aura enveloped Zhou Xian as soon as his step descended. At the same time, a footprint descended from the sky in a straight line, and everywhere the footprint passed, space was instantly obliterated. This footprint was truly capable of destroying the heavens and the earth. The expressions of all the experts here had changed. This was an ancient god realm expert. This wasn't something a great saint could compare to. Even a strand of his soul wasn't something a great saint could compare to. Could Zhou Xian stop it? Everyone turned to look at Zhou Xian. As he watched the footprint descend, Zhou Xian became excited. An expert. This was a true expert. A great saint? What's that? Zhou Xian wanted to fight against a powerhouse at this level. Zhou Xian suddenly laughed. "Bring it on." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward, drew his sword and slashed. "Draw the sword to decide life and death." As the sword slashed out, a sword cry instantly shook the heavens. Boom. Under everyone's gazes, Zhou Xian's sword slashed at the footprint. "Draw the sword to decide life and death" that was stacked over 400 times. Rumble. The footprint instantly shattered, and Zhou Xian retreated nearly 10,000 zhang in the blink of an eye. As soon as he stopped, a smear of blood slowly flowed from the corner of his mouth. Zhou Xian was defeated? Everyone looked at Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He raised his head to look at the old man and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Again. As soon as his voice fell, he suddenly dashed forward, drew his sword and slashed again. "Draw the sword to decide life and death." At this moment, the killing intent in his eyes swept across the world like a tidal wave. He didn't use the profound azure sword, but the mausoleum of swords. With a swing of his sword, the entire world was annihilated inch by inch. The old man's eyes flashed with astonishment. The power of Zhou Xian's sword was a little beyond his expectations. After all, Zhou Xian was only at the Heaven Ascension realm. Without hesitation, the old man took a step forward and punched out. Rumble. The space in front of him directly turned into a groove vortex, and Zhou Xian's sword was directly shattered. But at this moment, more than a dozen flying swords directly slashed at the old man at an extremely fast speed. However, the old man merely flicked his finger. Boom. The dozen or so sword lights directly exploded and turned into nothingness. At this moment, Zhou Xian's flying swords lost their effectiveness. At this moment, Zhou Xian had already retreated thousands of zhang away. As soon as Zhou Xian stopped, the old man said, "You're very good, but for me you're still far from it." "Is that so?" The corners of Zhou Xian's mouth curled up slightly. He slowly walked toward the old man, and the next moment the blood in his body directly boiled. The power of the bloodline. Boom. The moment the power of the bloodline was activated, the mausoleum of sword in Zhou Xian's hand directly trembled violently, and then it directly turned blood red. The mausoleum of sword suddenly said, "F***C, what a terrifying killing intent. Master, you're not a good person." Zhou Xian. Chapter 1801. The expressions of everyone here changed when Zhou Xian's killing intent surged out. Killing intent. The strength of Zhou Xian's killing intent exceeded their expectations. The first ancestor of the lesser heaven who stood before Zhou Xian stared fixedly at Zhou Xian. Bloodline energy. Zhou Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. A ray of blood-red light flashed through the battlefield. Life and death were decided by drawing the sword. However, it wasn't 400 overlapped this time, it was 480 overlapped. This sword strike caused the entire world to explode. The old man's expression changed at this moment. What a terrifying attack. The old man didn't even have the time to thank Xianxia before he smashed his fist forward. It was a head-on attack. Rumble. As a ray of blood-red light erupted, the old man was instantly pushed 30 kilometers back. Moreover, Xian was pushed back as well. However, he'd only been pushed back by a few kilometers. The countenances of the experts from the lesser abodes instantly turned pale when they witnessed this scene. The eyes of the experts in the surroundings were filled with disbelief as well. Xian had actually repelled an ancient god realm expert. Even though it was only a strand of his soul, it was still an ancient god realm expert. But Xian was only at the heaven ascension realm. Their minds were in chaos. The old man stared fixedly at Xian as well. How could this be possible? In theory, it was absolutely impossible for Xian to injure him, because the gap between them was too huge. No external force could make up for that gap. However, Xian had injured him. Meanwhile, Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. A ray of blood-red light flashed and slashed down towards the old man. A trace of seriousness flashed through the old man's eyes, and then he took a step forward and pressed his finger against the tip of Xian's sword. Bang! The ray of blood-red light shattered, and then both of them retreated explosively. As they retreated, over a dozen blood-red flying swords slashed down towards the old man. The old man's eyes narrowed slightly as he smashed his fist forward. Boom! The dozen or so blood-colored flying swords instantly shattered, but his soul became even more illusory. Every time he attacked, it consumed a great deal of energy. After all, this wasn't his main body. Murderous intent appeared in the old man's eyes. He had to kill Xian. If he didn't kill Xian, once he disappeared, the small grotto heaven would really be gone. Sensing the killing intent in the old man's eyes, Xian laughed. You want to kill me? Come, I beg you to kill me. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward again. A ray of sword light tore through the battlefield. In the distance, the old man stomped his right foot, and the space in front of him suddenly distorted. Space-time strangulation. When Xian's sword entered the distorted space, the sword light instantly shattered. Xian was shocked. He quickly retreated and looked at the strange space-time in front of the old man. A trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. An ancient god realm master was not as simple as he thought. Looking at Xian, the old man was even more shocked. Is this guy really only at the heaven ascension realm? This guy's cultivation realm is indeed only at the heaven ascension realm, but his battle strength far exceeds that of a saint. If this guy becomes a great saint, the old man didn't dare to continue the thought. Great saint. This kid must die. The murderous intent in the old man's eyes intensified. He looked at Xian, opened his palm, and a black square seal appeared in his hand. Xian glanced at the black square seal in the old man's hand and frowned slightly. You want to use a foreign object again? The old man looked at the black square seal in his hand and muttered a few words. In the next moment, the black square seal trembled. Not far away, Xian suddenly disappeared. A ray of sword light instantly appeared in front of the old man. The old man suddenly raised his head, and the black square seal in his hand turned into a ray of black light and shot out. Boom! Under everyone's gazes, Xian's sword light was shattered in an instant, and he himself was sent flying hundreds of thousands of feet away. Not only that, in the process of retreating he spat out a mouthful of blood. And when he stopped, the sword ruins in his hand was directly covered with countless cracks. Seeing this scene, everyone present looked at the black seal in the old man's hand. What is this? Everyone was curious and puzzled. In the distance, the old man slowly raised his hand, and on the black square seal in his hand was a thumb-sized figure. The figure's right hand was behind his back, and although it was small, it had an extraordinary bearing. At this moment, the figure suddenly laughed. Wuxia, you were actually forced to this extent by a heaven ascension, little boy. How interesting. The old man called Wuxia was expressionless. 10 directions, this person is not simple. The figure looked at Xian in the distance, and then he sized up Xian and then said, he is indeed not simple. To have such battle strength at such a young age, even in my era, he would be considered a monster. At this moment, Zhou Xian suddenly walked out from the darkness in the distance. Zhou Xian looked at the figure and said in a trembling voice, are you the 10 Directions Martial Saint? 10 Directions Martial Saint. As soon as these words were spoken, the palace master of the great spiritual god palace and the monarch of the sky demon kingdom looked at the figure. At this moment the figure laughed. I never thought that in this era, there would actually be someone who knows of me. Zhou Xian hurriedly bowed respectfully when he heard the figure admit it. I am the pavilion master of the battle pavilion, greet Senior Shifang. 10 Directions Martial Saint. This was a legendary figure. Moreover, he was a super monster. It was said that he started martial arts at the age of 5, attained the saint realm at the age of 10, attained the ancient god realm at the age of 20, and became a martial saint at the age of 25. His entire life was like a cheat. There was no one in the past and no one in the future could surpass him. Most importantly, Shifang was the only person who had entered the god's tomb and come out. The reason why Zhou Xian was so excited was that the ancestor of the battle pavilion had once received guidance from the 10 Directions martial saint. Shifang glanced at Zhou Xian. Battle pavilion. You are Mochi's successor. Zhou Xian hurriedly said, yes. Shifang glanced at Zhou Xian and then shook his head. You are too weak. You are much weaker than your martial ancestor. Zhou Xian felt slightly embarrassed when he heard this. Naturally, he was much weaker than the martial ancestor of the battle pavilion. Shifang looked at Yixian, and then he glanced at Yixian and said with a smile, you possess such combat strength at such a young age. You are really not simple. However, I'm afraid it will be impossible for you to destroy this small abode today. Yixian was about to speak when the ancestor of the small abode, Wen Xiu, suddenly said, Shifang, you owed me a favor all those years ago. If you kill this person today, I will forget about that favor. Shifang fell silent for a moment and then he said, if I attack, I will be bullying the weak. Wen Xiu shook his head, this person cannot be allowed to live or my small abode will be in danger. Shifang glanced at Yixian and then he said with a smile, indeed. Wen Xiu looked at Shifang, please. Shifang laughed, then I will kill him. As soon as he finished speaking, he looked at Yixian. Little fellow, there is no enmity between us, but I owe this old fellow a favor. Today he wants me to return the favor, but there is nothing I can do. So you, Yixian suddenly laughed, what nonsense are you talking about? As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly slashed out with his sword. Before anyone could react, the small black seal had been shattered and Shifang had instantly retreated hundreds of thousands of feet away. Everyone was stunned again, including Wen Xiu. Soon Wen Xiu looked at the sword in Yixian's hand. It was no longer the mausoleum of swords, but the azure mystic sword. When he saw the azure mystic sword, Wen Xiu's expression instantly changed. This sword actually contains the power of the law of the universe. How is this possible? Yixian ignored Wen Xiu and he looked at Shifang in the distance. Didn't you want to kill me? Come on. At this moment, Shifang's body was very illusory. That sword had almost destroyed him. If it wasn't for the black seal that had resisted most of the force, he would have been dead by now. Shifang stared fixedly at the azure mystic sword in Yixian's hand. Supreme Law Quintessence Energy. Yixian smiled. Didn't you want to kill me? Come on. As soon as he finished speaking, he swung his sword again. A strand of sword light tore through the air. In the distance, Shifang's expression instantly changed, and he suddenly charged forward and blasted his fist forward. A powerful force instantly swept through the heavens and the earth, and the mountains in an area of hundreds of thousands of kilometers collapsed at this moment. A single punch shattered the heavens and the earth. However, even such a terrifying punch hadn't been able to stop Yixian's sword. Bang! Everyone watched as Shifang retreated explosively by tens of thousands of zhang, and when he stopped he was almost translucent. Shifang gazed at Yixian with slight disbelief. Who forged that sword of yours? Yixian didn't waste his breath at all, and he was just about to attack again when Wen Xiu spoke abruptly. How dare you? Yixian turned around to look at Wen Xiu, and Wen Xiu stared fixedly at Yixian. How dare you steal an exalt's quintessence energy? Steal? Yixian frowned slightly and he was just about to retort when he thought about it again. The Qing didn't seem to have been stolen, it was taken by force. Taking by force seems to be worse than stealing. That's quite embarrassing. Meanwhile, when Xiu spoke abruptly, the person behind you actually dared to steal an exalt's quintessence energy? How audacious. Yixian gazed at Wen Xiu. Do you have a problem with that? Wen Xiu stared fixedly at Yixian. You're courting death. Yixian nodded. I beg you to kill me. Beg you to kill me. Everyone was speechless. Wen Xiu was just about to attack when he seemed to have thought of something, and he glanced at the sword in Yixian's hand. He was extremely fearful of that sword. Regardless of whether it was Shifeng or him, they weren't a match for Yi Xian right now. Yi Xian's sword was too terrifying. When Xiu fell silent for a short moment and then he gazed at Yi Xian. He withdrew an incense stick and lit it up. If it was anyone else, then perhaps they wouldn't be able to deal with you. Unfortunately, you encountered me. Because I was once acquainted with an exalt. As soon as he finished speaking, the space in the sky suddenly split apart, and then a strand of terrifying pressure swept down. In an instant, it wasn't just the minor abode, even the distant ancient god galaxy was trembling. The supreme laws of the universe. At this moment, the expressions of everyone here changed drastically. The minor abode can summon the supreme laws. Suddenly, the emperor of the great spiritual god palace stepped forward, and he gazed at Yi Xian and roared furiously, "Yi Xian, you've indiscriminately slaughtered the innocent. From this moment onward, my great spiritual god palace will fight you to the death." Obviously, he wanted to choose a side as soon as possible. The master of the battle pavilion, Zhou Xian, was clearly hesitant. He wanted to choose a side as well, but the battle pavilion owed a debt to Yi Xian. Zhou Xian didn't hesitate for long before he stood behind Wen Xiu in the end. The supreme laws of the universe. He could only choose to stand with the minor abode and draw a clear line between himself and Yi Xian. Otherwise, if the minor abode mistakenly thought that the battle pavilion was on Yi Xian's side, then it would be a huge problem. On the other side, the emperor of the heavenly demon kingdom hesitated for a moment, but he didn't choose a side in the end, and he just silently retreated to the side. He was afraid of the supreme laws of the universe as well. But it was exactly why he didn't choose a side. Why, damn it. The supreme laws of the universe are so terrifying. Who could possibly steal the energy of her laws? Isn't that nonsense? Therefore he decided to wait and see. Under everyone's gaze, a woman slowly walked over from the horizon. When he saw the woman, Wen Xiu immediately bowed respectfully. "Greetings, Supreme Master." Behind him, the experts of the minor abode also bowed respectfully. As for Shifeng, he hesitated for a moment before bowing slightly. Xinjiang was extremely excited. He quickly bowed respectfully and said with a trembling voice, "Greetings, Supreme Master." Zhou Xian hesitated for a moment before bowing deeply as well. "Greetings, Supreme Master." The woman didn't look at anyone. She only looked at Yi Xian. At this moment, Wen Xiu suddenly said, "Supreme Master, this person stole the energy of your origin law." The woman ignored Xinjiang and looked at Yi Xian. "You?" At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly wiped away his tears. "You bullied me. Where's my sister? Someone bullied me." Hearing this, the woman's expression changed drastically. P.S. Thanks, Xianxia Diamond Tool Factory's reader, Alliance Master's gift. There are also many gifts from friends. For the first time in a year, I'm in the top 10 of the monthly votes ranking. I'm really touched. Thank you everyone for your support. With so many people supporting me today, even with my thick skin, I'm embarrassed to upload 2 chapters. I won't say much. I'm really grateful to all my friends who support me. I still want to write for another 10 years. Oh no, I still want to write for another 10 years. I'll always be with you. Chapter 1802. Tinka. A woman in a plain dress. When the supreme law of the universe heard Yi Xian say this name, she was horrified. She hurriedly said, "When did I bully you?" Yi Xian glanced at Wen Xiu and said with slight grievance, "You're with them." The woman immediately said, "Nonsense." As she spoke, she turned to look at Wen Xiu. "Is there something wrong with you?" As soon as these words came out, Wen Xiu and the others were stunned. "What's going on?" The woman stared at Wen Xiu. "Are you retarded?" Everyone. Wen Xiu was stunned. "Supreme exalt you." The woman flew into a rage. "What? Do I know you that well?" At this moment she was really about to go mad with anger. She had almost been killed by the people of the small grotto heaven. Yet now the small grotto heaven had actually summoned her to kill Yi Xian. Kill Yi Xian. Damn it. Can this fellow be killed? He can't even move. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. The Supreme Exalt knows Yi Xian? That was what they were thinking. The Supreme Law suddenly shook his head. "When I met you, I thought you were a good person and wanted to form a good relationship with you. But I never expected you to be as brainless as your descendant." Wen Xiu said with a trembling voice, "Supreme Exalt, you know him?" The Supreme Law looked at Wuxia. I do. No. As soon as he spoke, the faces of Xinjiang and Zhu Xiao instantly turned ghastly pale. So Yi Xian knows the Supreme Law. Wuxia immediately bowed deeply. Supreme Exalt, this is a misunderstanding. Yi Xian suddenly said, it's not a misunderstanding. Everyone looked at Yi Xian while Yi Xian looked at the Supreme Law. Senior, do you want to protect this small grotto heaven? The Supreme Law fell silent for a while before saying, can you let them leave their inheritance? I owe you a favor. Yi Xian smiled. I can't defeat you, so I'll leave it if you say so. With that he turned around and left. Meanwhile, the Supreme Law's expression changed and she hurriedly said, wait. Yi Xian stopped and smiled. Is there anything else, Senior? The Supreme Law hesitated for a moment and then he said, do you have resentment in your heart? Yi Xian shook his head. No. Because I can't beat you. Hearing that, the Supreme Law sighed softly. You call this no resentment? Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior, with your protection I won't be able to destroy them, but, as he spoke he shook his head and smiled. Let's not talk about it anymore. With that he turned around and left. The Supreme Laws suddenly appeared before Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at the Supreme Laws without saying a word. The Supreme Law sighed softly. Can you just leave behind a legacy? Yi Xian looked straight at the Supreme Law and didn't say anything. The Supreme Law was just about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly withdrew the green profound sword. The Supreme Law's expression instantly changed when she saw this sword. She wasn't afraid of this sword. She was afraid of the person who'd forged this sword. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, the tiny abode has sent people to kill me time and time again. If I didn't have some strength, it would be impossible for me to stand before you. I, Yi Xian, am a person who repays kindness with kindness and enmity with enmity. I won't be able to destroy the tiny abode today. That's because I'm weak and I don't blame anyone. But in the future I'll definitely destroy their entire sect. As soon as he finished speaking, he walked towards the distance. Everyone was slightly stunned by this scene. This fellow doesn't even give face to the Supreme Law? Wuxia was stunned as well. It doesn't seem like the Supreme Being and Yi Xian just know each other. Right at this moment, the Supreme Law of Nature at the side suddenly sighed. Forget it. I won't interfere in this matter anymore. However, Yi Xian still didn't stop. At the sight of this, the Supreme Law blocked Yi Xian's path again. This time Yi Xian frowned. The Supreme Law looked at Yi Xian. I won't interfere anymore. However, Yi Xian shook his head. I won't kill them anymore. The Supreme Law was puzzled. Why? Yi Xian said calmly, if they call for help, I'll call for help as well. I'll let Qing'er handle this matter. As he spoke, he took out the green profound sword, and the green profound sword in his hand started vibrating violently. At the sight of this, the Supreme Law's expression changed drastically and she hurriedly said, wait. Yi Xian looked at the Supreme Law and the Supreme Law said solemnly, I've said it. I won't interfere in this matter anymore. If you want to kill me, go ahead. However, Yi Xian didn't care about her at all. Instead, he continued to activate the green profound sword. Numerous sword hums shot into the sky and shook the clouds. The Supreme Law was greatly alarmed and she hurriedly said, why bother her for such a small matter? I'll help you deal with it. Yi Xian looked at the Supreme Law. Aren't you in cahoots with them? The Supreme Law said angrily, nonsense. As she spoke, she looked at Wuxia. The latter said in a trembling voice, supremacy this. The Supreme Law's expression was calm. She waved her right hand, and the entire grotto heaven below instantly turned into nothingness. With just a wave of her hand, the entire grotto heaven was directly wiped out. It was simple and direct. At the sight of this, everyone's expression changed drastically. As for Wuxia, he looked at the Supreme Law in a daze. The Supreme Law glanced coldly at Wuxia. Think about it in your next life. As she spoke, she waved her sleeve. Bang! Wuxia was instantly wiped out. Truly wiped out. On the other side, Mu Su, the master of the grotto heaven who hadn't completely died, suddenly said in a trembling voice, supremacy you. The Supreme Law waved casually. Bang! Mu Su was instantly turned into nothingness. Subsequently, the Supreme Law turned to look at the great spiritual divine palace's palace master, Xinjiang. The latter's expression changed drastically and he hurriedly said, Supremacy, we have nothing to do with the grotto heaven. Yi Xian suddenly said, didn't you just say that you'll fight me to the death? Qinjiang hurriedly bowed to Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, the great spiritual divine palace. Yi Xian turned to look at the Supreme Law. I'm not familiar with him. The Supreme Law waved casually. Bang. Qinjiang was instantly wiped out. After killing Qinjiang, the Supreme Law looked at Zhu Xiao, who was at the side. Zhu Xiao smiled bitterly. Little friend Yi, my battle pavilion, Yi Xian said again, we're not familiar with each other. The Supreme Law waved again. Bang. Zhu Xiao was directly wiped out. The Supreme Law looked at the heavenly demon nation's monarch. The latter bowed slightly, then looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior, you may leave. It was the heavenly demon nation's monarch who did not pick a side just now. The heavenly demon nation's monarch cupped his fists. Thank you. After saying that, he turned around and left. He did not want to stay here even a moment longer. Only the martial saint of 10 directions was left in the field. The Supreme Law looked at the martial saint of 10 directions who had been silent all this while. The latter smiled faintly. Supremacy, there's something I don't understand. The Supreme Law looked at the martial saint of 10 directions. You're not qualified to make me explain anything. As she said that, she flicked her sleeves. In the distance, the martial saint of 10 directions' expression changed drastically. He suddenly put his palms together. Boundless heaven and earth. As soon as he said that, a huge figure suddenly appeared in the sky. The next moment, the figure directly punched down. It was going head-on against the laws of the universe. Rumble. As soon as the two powerful forces came into contact, the huge figure instantly crumbled, and the martial saint of 10 directions was sent flying hundreds of thousands of feet away. As soon as he stopped, his wisp of soul began to disappear at a speed visible to the naked eye. He still could not block the Supreme Law's attack. Yi Xian could not help but look at the Supreme Law. Damn it, this woman is so terrifying. The current him was no match for this woman at all. Even if he used the green profound sword, he might not be a match for her. The Supreme Law looked around. There were still some people hidden in the surroundings. She frowned slightly. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly pointed at Xiao Linlang in the distance. I know her. The Supreme Law nodded and waved her right hand. Boom. Within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles, all the experts hidden in the dark were wiped out. They were all killed. Yi Xian looked at the Supreme Law. His intuition told him that she was angry. Because there was absolutely no need to kill the others. But she still killed them. It must be because he did not give her face just now. At the thought of this, Yi Xian cupped his fists. Thank you, Senior. The Supreme Law looked at Yi Xian and did not say anything. Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. Senior, I don't have anything against you. It's not that I didn't give you face. The main thing is that this small grotto heaven is too much. They sent people to kill me again and again. I really can't tolerate it. After a moment of silence, the Supreme Law said, What do you plan to do next? Yi Xian said, I'll work hard to become stronger. The Supreme Law looked at Yi Xian. Take care. After saying that, he was about to leave. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior. The Supreme Law looked at Yi Xian. What's the matter? Yi Xian hurriedly nodded. Senior, I have a friend who is talented and intelligent. She has admired you for a long time and wants to learn the laws of the universe from you. I wonder if you are willing. The Supreme Law shook his head. I don't accept disciples. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Alright. I can only let her learn from Qing. It's just that her foundation is a little weak now. It'll be a little slow to learn from Qing. There's a transition. The Supreme Law suddenly said, Can you convince your sister to accept a disciple? Yi Xian smiled. He's my sister. She definitely won't refuse if I ask. The Supreme Law was silent for a moment before saying, Let her learn from me first. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Really? The Supreme Law nodded. Actually, she also wanted to ask the plain-dressed lady some questions. However, the plain-dressed lady did not care about her at all. He finally realized something. That mysterious lady was only nice to Yi Xian. Other than Yi Xian, she would not give face to anyone else. If she accepted the person recommended by Yi Xian and Yi Xian recommended that person to the plain-dressed lady in the future, it would be very beneficial to her. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Senior, please wait a moment. With that, he turned around and disappeared. It didn't take long for him to appear once more and Dao Yi was by his side. The Supreme Law took a glance at Dao Yi. Yi Xian nodded. Yes. As he spoke he tugged on Dao Yi's sleeve. Quickly acknowledge him as your master. Dao Yi hesitated for a moment before bowing slightly. Greetings, master. The supreme laws of nature nodded slightly. You'll follow me from now on. Yi Xian chuckled. All right. Then the three of us are a family from now on. The two girls looked at Yi Xian at the same time. Chapter 1803. A family. The Supreme Law looked at Yi Xian. How did we become a family? Yi Xian said with a straight face, Senior, you're Dao Yi's master, so you're my master too. As the saying goes, a master for a day, a father for life. We're definitely a family. The Supreme Law was speechless. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, can I ask you a question? The Supreme Law looked at Yi Xian. What is it? Yi Xian moved his mind and a flying sword instantly slashed 10,000 feet away. A flying sword? Yi Xian said, Senior, what do you think of my flying sword? The Supreme Law said calmly, It's not good at all. Yi Xian was a little embarrassed. Is it not powerful at all? The Supreme Law nodded. It's very weak. Yi Xian's face darkened. The Supreme Law said calmly, Do you think it's very powerful? Yi Xian smiled embarrassedly. This should be okay. After all, it can even kill a great sage in an instant. The Supreme Law was expressionless. An ant-like existence like a great sage can be killed in an instant. Do you have a sense of superiority? Yi Xian said solemnly, Senior, a great sage is a top-notch expert in this ancient god star sector. The Supreme Law looked at Yi Xian. Those people I killed just now, do they think I'm very powerful? Yi Xian nodded. They worship you like a god. The Supreme Law said again, But in my eyes, your sister is even more terrifying. Yi Xian was speechless. The Supreme Law said softly, Vision. Many times strength limits vision. Because you're not strong enough, you can't see a bigger world and stronger people. If you're not strong enough, you won't understand how terrifying some circles are. Just like an ordinary person, he doesn't know that his entire life's work might not even be worth a meal from someone else. As she said that, she looked at Yi Xian. You think that your sword is very strong, but that's because the person you're facing now is very weak. What if you face me? Do you think this sword of yours is strong enough? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian nodded. I've learned something. The Supreme Law nodded slightly. Do you know why I asked you to spare the small grotto heaven? Yi Xian looked at the Supreme Law. It's not just because you're acquainted with the small grotto heaven's ancestor? The Supreme Laws of Nature shook its head. This is only one of the reasons. In fact, there's another reason. As she spoke, she paused for a moment before continuing. I know weeds must be weeded out by the roots. However, with all due respect, is there any meaning to you fighting to the death with the little grotto heaven and the great spiritual god palace? Yi Xian was puzzled. What do you mean? The Supreme Laws of Nature looked at Yi Xian. A dragon will never go into a pond to fight for territory with a fish. Upon hearing that, Yi Xian understood. The Supreme Laws of Nature said again, You're too stubborn, and being too stubborn is easy to break. Just like this flying sword of yours, it's very fast, so fast that it doesn't belong to a speed that someone of your realm should have. However, is it really fast? Yi Xian bowed slightly. Senior, please guide me. The Supreme Laws of Nature said calmly, Let's not discuss such low-level things. Upon hearing that, Yi Xian was stunned. Holiest *T. This sounds familiar. Didn't Qinger say that to me before? She's saying it to me now. This is revenge. Revenge. The Supreme Laws of Nature was about to leave with Dao Yi, but Yi Xian grabbed her arm. The Supreme Laws of Nature looked at Yi Xian. What are you trying to do? Yi Xian said seriously, Senior, please guide me. The Supreme Laws of Nature said calmly, Is there any meaning in discussing such low-level things? Yi Xian hurriedly nodded. There's a meaning. To me there's a meaning. The Supreme Laws of Nature looked at Yi Xian. But there's no meaning to me. Yi Xian blinked. But you're my master. The Supreme Laws of Nature frowned slightly. When did I take you in as my disciple? Yi Xian pointed at Dao Yi. Is she your disciple? The Supreme Laws of Nature nodded. Yes. But what has that got to do with you? Yi Xian blurted out, I like Dao Yi. She's my woman. If she's your master, then she's my master too. After saying that, she felt a little regretful. Holiest asterisk T. I was too rash. He looked at Dao Yi, and Dao Yi was also looking at him. I'm your woman? Yi Xian nodded. At a time like this he couldn't back down. Dao Yi smiled. When did this happen? Why didn't I know about it? Yi Xian said, I like you. Dao Yi looked at Yi Xian. You like me, so I'm your woman? Yi Xian looked at Dao Yi. Do you hate me? Dao Yi thought about it and said, I don't hate you, but I didn't say that I like you, did I? Yi Xian said, when I said that I like you, it wasn't because I wanted to ask for advice from you, senior. I really like you. Dao Yi fell silent. Yi Xian walked to Dao Yi and grabbed Dao Yi's hand. Dao Yi didn't refuse. Yi Xian looked at Dao Yi. Would you let another man hold your hand like that? Dao Yi still didn't say anything. Yi Xian said again, I don't know when we'll meet again, but no matter when, as long as you need me, let me know. As long as I'm still alive, I'll be there. Take care. After saying that, he turned and left. Dao Yi looked at Yi Xian from afar and still didn't say anything. At this moment, the Supreme Law suddenly said, Be careful. Dao Yi looked at the Supreme Law. The Supreme Law said calmly, This guy is very cunning. And his skin is extraordinarily thick. Dao Yi, but, the Supreme Law said again, I can see that too. Although this guy is a little petty, even a little childish, he's the kind of person who will treat you well if you treat him well. And if you were to treat him badly, he would also return the favor, and he would do it to the extreme. And his feelings for you should be sincere. However, if you fall in love with him, you have to be careful. Dao Yi smiled faintly. Be careful of what? The Supreme Law looked at the distant horizon. Two aspects. First, in terms of strength, you might not be able to catch up to him. Second, this guy is cunning, thick-skinned, and has strength. You might not be his last woman. Dao Yi smiled and said, He already has a few now. The Supreme Law looked at Dao Yi. What do you think? Dao Yi was silent for a moment before saying, I just want to learn the Tao of the universe's laws from Master. The Supreme Law nodded. Dao Yi suddenly said, Master, is there another reason why you don't guide him? The Supreme Law said, He needs to settle down for a while. Dao Yi nodded slightly. I understand. As if thinking of something, she said, Master, do you know about this god's graveyard? The Supreme Law nodded. Know about Dao Yi? Why did he provoke this god's graveyard again? No, did this god's graveyard provoke him again? Dao Yi nodded. The Supreme Law sighed softly. Dao Yi said in a low voice, Is the god's graveyard very strong? The Supreme Law nodded. It's not something he can fight against now. Dao Yi was a little worried and wanted to say something but stopped. The Supreme Law smiled and said, Worried about him? Dao Yi nodded. The Supreme Law shook its head and sighed. Don't you think you should be worried about the god's graveyard? Dao Yi, the Supreme Law said again, It seems like you have really fallen in love with him. Silly girl. Dao Yi, the destruction of the small grotto heaven had shocked the universe. No one knew how the small heavenly abode was destroyed. Because everyone in the small grotto heaven that day, except for the heavenly demon nation king and Xiao Linlang, everyone else had been killed. Of course, this was not the main point. The main point was that Yi Xian was still alive. Yi Xian was alive. But the small grotto heaven was gone. One had to know that the small grotto heaven was backed by the Supreme Law. But now the small grotto heaven was gone. But Yi Xian was still alive. Heavenly Demon Nation. On this day a man came to the Heavenly Demon Nation. He wore simple clothes and had a sword wrapped in hemp rope on his waist. When the man came to the Heavenly Demon Nation, a middle-aged man stood in front of him. The middle-aged man was the Heavenly Demon Nation's crown prince. When he saw the small tombstone on the man's chest, his expression changed. The god's graveyard. The man nodded slightly. I am Lin Fan. I have come to ask your king. The middle-aged man hurriedly said, Please come in. Inside a big hall. The Heavenly Demon Nation king looked at Lin Fan in front of him. What do you want to ask? Lin Fan said, Not long ago I felt the aura of an honorable. When I rushed to the small grotto heaven there was no one there. But from what I know you were there before that. The Heavenly Demon Nation king was silent. Obviously he was here to find out information. Lin Fan asked again, what happened? The heavenly demon nation king sighed. Yi Xian knows the honorable. Knows the honorable. Lin Fan frowned. Knows. The heavenly demon nation king nodded. Yes. After a moment of silence, Lin Fan turned and left. The heavenly demon nation king suddenly said, Sir, will the god's graveyard still target Yi Xian? Lin Fan shook his head and stopped. Just because he knows the honorable he can do whatever he wants? The god's graveyard is not a small grotto heaven. We don't need the honorable's protection. If the honorable asks, the god's graveyard can give her face. But the honorable hasn't said anything. After saying this, he disappeared into the distance. Inside the hall, the heavenly demon nation king shook his head. What the hell? Didn't your people kill him first? You make it sound like he was the one who provoked you first. At this moment, the middle-aged man not far away said, Father, the god's graveyard knows that Yi Xian and the honorable are enemies, but they still target him. The heavenly demon nation king shook his head and sighed. It's a matter of face. Of course, the most important thing is that they have the strength and aren't afraid of the honorable. The middle-aged man said, Then isn't this Yi Xian very dangerous? The heavenly demon nation king said softly, I don't know if Yi Xian is dangerous or not. All I know is that they are big shots. We can't afford to offend them. The middle-aged man. On the other side, Yi Xian, who was riding on his sword, suddenly stopped. Not far away from him stood a middle-aged man and a woman in a green dress. He knew the woman in the green dress. She was from the building. And this middle-aged man was the building master of the building. The building master looked at Yi Xian and said, Young master, Yi knows the honorable. Yi Xian asked, What's the matter? The building master was stunned and then said, Young master Yi, do you know how terrifying the god's graveyard is? A sword suddenly pressed against the building master's forehead. The building master's voice stopped abruptly. Yi Xian looked at the building master and said, Do the two of you complain about it every day? After saying this, he looked at the woman in the green dress and said, Sorry, I forgot. You don't have that egg. The woman in the green dress. P.S. Please vote. Please vote. Chapter 1804. Yi Xian sighed softly. You two, I have no enmity with the two of you, nor do I wish to hurt the two of you. However, can you not come looking for me and emphasize how scary the graveyard of the gods is? I know they're scary, but they were the ones who provoked me first, okay? If they want to kill me, I can't resist and can only let them kill me. The owner of the small building said solemnly, Young Master Yi, we have no ill intentions towards you. We just want to remind you. With a thought from Yi Xian, the sword between the eyebrows of the owner of the small building immediately disappeared. The owner of the small building heaved a sigh of relief. In that instant just now he was truly terrified. He could not even take a single strike from Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly said, Previously, you told me that someone came to look for me in the graveyard of the gods. Who is it? The owner of the small building said, Previously, several major forces went to look for him, but he did not see anyone from the major forces. However, my people have seen him. He is a swordsman. And he is a very powerful swordsman. Swordsman. Yi Xian blinked. Swordsman. The owner of the small building nodded. He is the same as young Master Yi, a swordsman. Yi Xian smiled. What was he least afraid of? He was a swordsman. But very quickly Yi Xian's smile disappeared. I can't be careless and underestimate the enemy. Not to mention people like Qing'er and his dad, even a swordsman like Ai is not someone he can resist. I can't be arrogant. I have to keep a low profile. At this moment the owner of the small building continued, I wonder if I can ask young Master Yi a question? Yi Xian looked at the owner of the small building and said with a smile, Ask away. The owner of the small building said solemnly, Young Master Yi, do you know Zhizun? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The expression of the small building's owner turned solemn. Is it the familiar kind? Yi Xian gave a half-smile. What do you think? Xiao Lu's landlord was dumbfounded. Young Master Yi, don't tell me you have that kind of relationship with Zhizun. Holy **T. Yi Xian was a little confused. What was this guy thinking? Seeing that Yi Xian didn't reply, the building master was certain in his heart. At the beginning he was only guessing. The reason why he guessed that kind of relationship was because Yi Xian's smile was a little ambiguous. However, he did not expect that Yi Xian and Zhizun really had that kind of relationship. This Zhizun keeps a male pet? The building master didn't dare to think too much. Yi Xian did not explain much. He cupped his fists and said, "Your Excellency, farewell." With that he turned around and left. This building was an intelligence department, and it would be of great help to him in the future. Since the other party was expressing goodwill, he naturally would not reject it. At this moment the building master suddenly said, "Young Master Yi." Yi Xian turned around and looked at the building master. The building master said solemnly, "Young Master Yi, if you need anything in the future, just let me know." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Of course." The building master nodded, "Young Master Yi, take care." Yi Xian smiled, then turned around and disappeared into the horizon. Next to the building master, the woman in green dress suddenly said, "Landlord, do you think he can resist God's graveyard?" The building master said softly, "I have overlooked an important piece of information." The woman in green dress asked, "What is it?" The building master said solemnly, "If this young Master Yi is placed in God's graveyard, what rank do you think he would be among the younger generation?" The woman in green dress said, "He should also be favored by the heavens." The building master smiled slightly. "Before this, I felt that there were no forces in the universe that could compare to God's graveyard. However, does our building know all the forces in the universe?" The woman in green dress was silent for a moment, then said, "God's graveyard should already know that this young Master Yi knows is supreme. Will they still target him?" The building master nodded. "They will." The woman in green dress was puzzled. "Why?" The building master said, "Because of face. Of course, it's also because God's graveyard is not that afraid of supreme. You should know that there is more than one supreme in this universe." "More than one supreme?" The building master continued, "Let's wait and see." Soon the two left. After parting ways with the owner of the small building, Yi Xian found a dead and silent starry sky and then entered the small tower. Naturally, he did not forget that Xiao Ta had a special ability. 10 years inside was equivalent to 1 day outside. Of course, he had to make good use of this heaven-defying ability. In the following time, Yi Xian began to study the way of space-time. Actually, he could reach the mortal severing realm or even the space-time realm now. However, he still did not choose to break through. His goal had never changed, and that was to reach the heaven ascension realm without limit. He wanted to reach it without limit. The world inside Xiao Ta was very big. While Yi Xian was cultivating, Xiao Ta would bring Xiaoan the sword mausoleum and Xiaoling to play all day long. Xiaoan sat by a lake, her hands supporting her chin as if she was thinking about something. At this moment Xiaoling walked in front of Xiaoan, took out a spirit fruit and handed it to Xiaoan, "Eat." Xiaoan looked at Xiaoling. On Xiaoling's shoulder there was a little guy. It was the divine level spirit vein. Xiaoling sat beside Xiaoan looking at the lake in the distance. "Xiaoan, you seem a little unhappy." Xiaoan shook her head slightly. "No." After saying that, she looked down at the palm of her right hand. In her palm, the black lotus imprint would squirm from time to time, as if it was about to come to life. She was very scared. She wanted to tell Yi Xian, but she did not dare. Because this lotus imprint almost burned Yi Xian last time. She was very worried. At this moment Xiaoling giggled and grabbed Xiaoan's right hand. "Then let's go play together." The moment her hand was grabbed by Xiaoling, Xiaoan's expression changed drastically. She was about to pull her hand back, but she soon found that the black lotus imprint did not react at all. Xiaoan was a little confused. Why did Xiaoling have no problem grabbing her hand? While she was puzzled, Xiaoling had already pulled her away. Time passed little by little. It had to be said that when it came to cultivation, time passed too quickly. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. On the other side, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the top of a mountain. At this moment he was surrounded by nearly 80 time-dimensional rivers. It had to be said that this was really tiring because each time he condensed a time-dimensional river, it would consume a lot of energy. However, Yi Xian was getting more and more excited. Limitless. He wanted to achieve limitless. As long as he could achieve limitless, his sort of time and space would also be limitless. Limitless sort of time and space meant limitless flying swords. If he could really achieve limitless, the current realm would no longer be meaningful to him. Of course, he still had to go through this process. Many things sounded simple, but he still had to go through them personally. It was just like how everyone knew that it would hurt to be cut by a knife, but if he did not cut himself, he would never know what that pain felt like. In addition to studying the Tao of time and space, he also studied his flying swords and drawing the sword to determine life and death. In the following time, Zhou Xian immersed himself in cultivation. On this day, a swordsman came to the small building. This person was Lin Fan. When Lin Fan arrived at the small building, the building owner came out to welcome him. The building owner cupped his fists. "Your Excellency." He did not dare to offend Zhou Xian, nor did he dare to offend the god's graveyard. Lin Fan nodded slightly. "Help me." The building owner said, "Please speak." Lin Fan looked at the building owner. "I want to know the whereabouts of that Zhou Xian." Zhou Xian's whereabouts. The building owner's face instantly turned serious. "Your Excellency wants to kill him?" Lin Fan nodded. The building owner was a little hesitant. Lin Fan looked at the building owner. "Not willing?" The building owner smiled bitterly. "It's not that I'm not willing, but we also don't know where young Master Yi is. For an expert of his level, if he wants to hide, it will be hard for outsiders to find him." Lin Fan nodded slightly. "Sorry for disturbing." With that, he turned and left. Behind him, the building owner said softly, "If this young Master Yi goes to the god's graveyard to slaughter, it will be fun." Saying that, he shook his head and smiled. "How is that possible, god's graveyard? That god's graveyard is not a small grotto heaven." Not long after Lin Fan left the building, a woman suddenly appeared in front of him. It was Great Spiritual God Palace's Cao Xiu. Cao Xiu looked at Lin Fan. "You want to find that Zhou Xian?" Lin Fan nodded. "You know where he is?" Cao Xiu shook her head. "I don't know where he is, but I know someone who can contact him." Lin Fan said, "Who?" Cao Xiu said, "Follow me." With that, she turned and left. Lin Fan also followed. Soon, both of them arrived at Great Spiritual God Palace's Lingxiu Peak. Cao Xiu brought Lin Fan directly to Li Xiran. Cao Xiu looked at Li Xiran. "Contact Zhou Xian." Li Xiran hesitated, then said, "Peak leader Cao Xiu, I can't contact Brother Yi." Cao Xiu stared at Li Xiran. "As long as you contact him, I will let you be a direct disciple." Li Xiran shook his head. "I can't contact him." Cao Xiu squinted her eyes. "You refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." With that, she pressed her right hand down lightly. Boom. Li Xiran directly knelt on the ground, his knees instantly shattered. Li Xiran clenched his fists. He glanced at the small grave on Lin Fan's left chest, then looked at Cao Xiu. "I can't contact him." Obviously, he had already recognized Lin Fan's identity. The people from the Graveyard of Gods were looking for Zhou Xian. Brother Yi was in danger. Cao Xiu looked at Li Xiran. "Looks like you want to die." With that, she pressed her right hand down lightly. In an instant, all the bones in Li Xiran's body shattered. Li Xiran's eyes widened, his entire face contorted, but he kept staring at Cao Xiu. "I can't contact him." He could actually contact Zhou Xian, but he knew that if he contacted Zhou Xian, then the people from the Graveyard of Gods would definitely be able to find Zhou Xian. At that time, Zhou Xian would be in danger. Zhou Xian treated him like a brother. Why would he betray his brother? Cao Xiu stared at Li Xiran, her right hand slowly pressing down. Father. Not only were all the bones in Li Xiran's body shattering, even his flesh was cracking bit by bit. Li Xiran laughed sinisterly. "Kill me. You killed me." Cao Xiu shook her head. "What did I? Your thinking is too simple. If you don't contact Zhou Xian, I'll make you wish you were dead." As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her lily-white hand lightly. In an instant, pieces of Li Xiran's flesh flew out. Death by 1,000 cuts. Li Xiran laughed out loud. "That's it? Is that all?" Cao Xiu looked at Li Xiran. "You've only known him for less than a month and he's not related to you at all. Is it worth it to destroy your body and soul for him?" Li Xiran slowly closed his eyes. "He's 100 times stronger than me, Li Xiran, but he treats me like a brother. I, Li Xiran, may not be a genius, but I, Li Xiran, will never betray my brother. I can't make it." Chapter 1805. Cao Xiu glared at Li Xiran in front of her. "Since you have such backbone, then I'll fulfill your wish." As she spoke, she was about to attack. However, an old man suddenly appeared here. The person who came was one of the 6 peak masters, Yu Wan. Ever since Qin Jiang died, he was now the palace lord of the great spiritual god palace. Yu Wan said in a low voice, "Junior apprentice sister, you've gone too far." Cao Xiu snarled, "What do you mean by too much? This person is a disciple of my great spiritual god palace, but he is helping an outsider. Shouldn't they be killed?" Yu Wan took a glance at Li Shiran before saying, "Junior sister, there's no point in targeting him." Cao Xiu said angrily, "I'm not targeting him, but he knows where Yi Xian is." Yu Wan frowned. "Why can't you let go of your hatred?" Cao Xiu glared at Yu Wan. The one who died wasn't senior brother's disciple. Of course senior brother can let go of his hatred. Yu Wan sighed softly and was about to speak when Lin Fan suddenly said, "I only need to know Yi Xian's whereabouts. If he's willing to tell me Yi Xian's whereabouts, then I won't make things difficult for him. Similarly, our god's graveyard will not make things difficult for the great spiritual god palace." The graveyard of the gods. Yu Wan's expression turned grave and he couldn't help but glance at Cao Xiu. He sighed again in his heart. He was even a little angry. Actually, what he meant was that the great spiritual god palace should not interfere in the matter between the tomb of the gods and Yi Xian, because the great spiritual god palace could not afford to offend either side. And now Cao Xiu had contacted the tomb of the gods. If the tomb of the gods really managed to get rid of Yi Xian, that would be fine. But what if they couldn't? What would happen to the great spiritual god palace then? If he expelled Cao Xiu from the great spiritual god palace now, it would be equivalent to slapping the tomb of the gods in the face. The great spiritual god palace was caught in a dilemma. Cao Xiu suddenly said again, "Senior brother, eldest senior brother's death is absolutely related to that Yi Xian. The great spiritual divine palace has no enmity with the great spiritual divine palace, so it is impossible for him to kill eldest senior brother. There is only one explanation, and that is that Yi Xian instigated the great spiritual divine palace to kill eldest senior brother. How can my great spiritual god palace not take revenge?" Yu Wan was silent. Cao Xiu continued, "Now that the graveyard of the gods has personally come forward, what are you still worried about?" Lin Fan looked at Yu Wan. "Is there a problem?" His tone was somewhat displeased. Yu Wan was shocked as he hurriedly replied, "Of course not." As he spoke, he looked at Li Xiran. "If you can contact that Yi Xian, tell us. As long as you tell us, our great spiritual god palace will not make things difficult for you. Not only that, I can also promote you to a true disciple." Coercion and bribery. At this moment, the lower half of Li Shiran's body had already been sliced into countless pieces, but he didn't make a single sound. Li Shiran clenched his fists tightly, his entire body trembling. "I don't know. I just don't know." Hearing that, Yu Wan frowned slightly. "Why are you doing this?" Cao Xiu suddenly said, "It's fine if he doesn't tell me. I naturally have a way." As she spoke, she walked in front of Li Shiran and slapped his shoulder with her right hand. Boom. Li Shiran's entire body directly turned into powder, leaving only his soul. Cao Xiu placed her right hand on Li Shiran's soul and in an instant, Li Shiran's soul directly ignited. Soul ignition. Li Shiran's eyes opened wide as his entire face twisted. Unbearable pain. At this moment he only had one thought, and that was to die. Cao Xiu was extracting his memories. Not only was she extracting his memories, but she was also burning his soul. Actually, Cao Xiu could only extract his memories and didn't need to burn his soul. But Cao Xiu obviously wanted to torture him to death. It was very painful. But Li Shiran didn't even make a sound. After a moment, Cao Xiu smiled sinisterly. "You're very loyal, then I'll fulfill your brotherhood." As her voice faded, she retracted her hand. Boom. Li Shiran's soul directly ignited. Cao Xiu smiled even more sinisterly. "Don't worry, I'll get the Yi Xian to accompany you very soon." As she spoke, she turned to look at Lin Fan. "I can contact Yi Xian now. Are you confident in killing him?" Lin Fan nodded. "As long as Jizun doesn't appear, I have a 90% chance of killing him." As he spoke, he suddenly pressed his right hand lightly towards Li Shiran and the flames on Li Shiran's body immediately disappeared. Lin Fan said, "If I kill him now, that Yi Xian probably won't come. Leave him with one breath and let that Yi Xian come." Cao Xiu nodded. "You're still the most thoughtful one." As she spoke, she took out a voice transmission talisman and crushed it. Chao Xiao looked at the end of the horizon, her expression gradually becoming sinister. Yi Xian, it's time to pay with blood. Inside Xiao, Yi Xian, who was cultivating, suddenly frowned. He directly left Xiao Ta, and behind him, there were hundreds of time-dimensional rivers. It hasn't even been a day in the outside world, but inside Xiao Ta, several years have passed. When Yi Xian left Xiao Ta, the space in front of him suddenly trembled. Then Chao Xiao's voice came from the trembling space. A moment later, Yi Xian slightly narrowed his eyes, and in the next moment he directly disappeared from the spot. Great Spiritual God Palace, Lingxiu Peak. Chao Xiao retracted her gaze and a sword light fell straight in front of her. Chao Xiao was shocked so fast. Seeing Yi Xian, Yu Luan's expression instantly became solemn. Towards Yi Xian, he naturally didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. This was a person who could destroy a small cave. Lin Fan was also sizing up Yi Xian, his left hand already on the hilt of his sword. Yi Xian walked in front of Li Shiran. When he saw Yi Xian's almost transparent soul, he slowly closed his eyes. Li Shiran smiled slightly. "Brother Yi," Yi Xian said softly, "sorry. I've implicated you." Li Shiran shook his head. "I've implicated Brother Yi." Yi Xian suddenly turned to look at Chao Xiao. "If you want to target me, just come to me directly. Why do you have to target him? He's a disciple of Great Spiritual God Palace. What wrong did he do? Why are you treating him like this?" Chao Xiao sneered. "What wrong? He knows you, that's a mistake." Yi Xian slightly narrowed his eyes. "From today onwards, there will be no Great Spiritual God Palace in this world." Chao Xiao said mockingly. "With just you?" Before Chao Xiao could finish speaking, her forehead was directly pierced by a sword. Seeing this scene, Yu Luan's expression instantly changed. He said in horror, "You?" He was already speechless. Chao Xiao was about to reach Great Saint. Yet she was insta-killed by Yi Xian just like that. At the side, Lin Fan also had a trace of disbelief in his eyes. "Why is your sword so fast?" Yi Xian looked at Lin Fan. "You're from God's graveyard?" Lin Fan looked at Yi Xian. "Yes." Yi Xian turned to look at Chao Xiao and said with a smile, "So he's the reason why you're so arrogant." As he spoke, he willed it in his heart. A ray of sword light flashed through the battlefield. The moment Yi Xian used his flying sword, Lin Fan's expression instantly changed, and he suddenly drew his sword and slashed forward. Although he had drawn his sword in a moment of desperation, it was still as fast as lightning. Boom! A ray of sword light shattered, and Lin Fan's body directly stiffened on the spot. It wasn't Yi Xian's sword light that shattered, but his own. Although he drew his sword very quickly, Yi Xian's flying sword was even faster. A sword of qi pierced through Lin Fan's forehead. An instant kill. Chao Xiao's face was filled with disbelief when she saw this scene. "This?" Yi Xian looked at Chao Xiao. "Do you still have something to rely on?" Fear appeared in Chao Xiao's eyes. "You, how can you be so strong? This is absolutely impossible. This can't be real." At this moment she had already broken down. This expert from God's graveyard was actually insta-killed by Yi Xian's sword. This was someone from God's graveyard. Gone just like that. Didn't they say they would get rid of Yi Xian? Lin Fan also looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. "Why is your sword so fast?" Yi Xian glanced at Lin Fan. "You want to know?" Lin Fan nodded subconsciously. Yi Xian smiled. "I'm not telling you." Lin Fan. At this moment Yu Luan suddenly said in a trembling voice, "Young Master Yi, my Great Spiritual God Palace." Yi Xian suddenly turned and slashed. A sword directly pierced through Yu Luan's forehead. Yi Xian looked at Yu Luan. "Did I give you permission to speak?" Yu Luan. Yi Xian walked in front of Li Xiuran. Li Xiuran smiled bitterly. "Brother Yi, if I knew you were so strong, I would have contacted you." He was indeed a little aggrieved. "Damn it. If I knew this guy was so strong, I wouldn't have needed to use the hammer." He had suffered for nothing. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He took out the green profound sword and said, "Little soul, protect Brother Li's soul." The green profound sword directly absorbed Li Xiuran's soul. Soul nurturing. With the help of the green profound sword, Li Xiuran's soul that was about to completely disappear was directly stabilized. And Yi Xian also heaved a sigh of relief. Yi Xian turned to look at Yu Luan. The latter said in a low voice, Yi Xian, this matter is my senior and junior sister's fault. Don't implicate the entire great spiritual god palace, Yi Xian suddenly said. I said it. From today onwards the great spiritual god palace is no more. As he spoke, countless flying swords suddenly slashed towards the depths of the great spiritual god palace with a thought. Hiss, hiss, hiss. In an instant, countless shrill cries resounded throughout the entire great spiritual god palace. Yuan's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Yi Xian, do you really want to go to such extremes? Yi Xian glanced coldly at Yuan, then looked at Xiao Xiu. It was because I didn't go to such extremes that I almost caused Brother Li's death. So, from today onwards I will kill anyone who is an enemy of Yi Xian and not leave any future troubles. As he spoke, over a dozen flying swords slashed out with a thought. In an instant, over a dozen bloody heads soared into the sky from the depths of the great spiritual god palace. In the distance Xiaoxia was horrified. She looked at Lin Fan and roared furiously, "Aren't you from the tomb of the gods? Go get him. Come on." Lin Fan went silent for a moment before he said, "Can't you see that there's a sword in my head? Yuan. P.S. Honestly, what do you guys think when you see me shamelessly begging for votes every day?" Chapter 1806. In fact, Lin Fan was also shocked. He was a Descent Realm swordsman. Not only that, but he was also a genuine great sage. As long as he didn't encounter an ancient god realm expert, he was practically invincible. However, he was instantly killed by Yi Xian. And Yi Xian was only in the Heaven Ascension realm. This was too much. Yi Xian suddenly looked at Lin Fan. "You came to the tomb of the gods to kill me?" Lin Fan looked at Yi Xian. "Who the hell are you?" Yi Xian smiled. "My name is Yi Xian." As he spoke, a sword sank into Lin Fan's body. The Azure Profound Sword. The Azure Profound Sword madly absorbed Lin Fan's soul. Lin Fan suddenly opened his palm. In his hand, a red talisman directly turned into a faint light and disappeared into the horizon. Taking a look at the sky, Yi Xian said with a smile, "Are you calling for help?" Lin Fan stared at Yi Xian. "You will pay the price." Yi Xian smiled, "Perhaps. But you won't be able to see it." As soon as he finished speaking, he flicked his sleeve. Boom. The Azure Profound Sword completely absorbed Lin Fan. Seeing Yi Xian kill Lin Fan, Yuan's face instantly paled. Grand Spiritual God Palace is finished. Completely finished. Yi Xian dared to kill people from the Tomb of the Gods. What more their Grand Spiritual God Palace? As if remembering something, Yuan suddenly turned to Xiao Xiu and roared, "Do you see what you did? Do you see it?" Xiao Xiu's face was ashen. At this moment she was also afraid. Even an expert of Lin Fan's level was killed by Yi Xian with a single strike. Just how strong was Yi Xian? At this time, Yi Xian turned and walked towards the Grand Spiritual God Palace. At this time an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was the young martial uncle. Little martial uncle looked at Yi Xian. "Can you spare my great spiritual god palace?" Yi Xian smiled. "When she was targeting Li Shiran, why didn't you ask her to spare his life?" Little martial uncle said solemnly, "We were wrong." Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't need your apologies." Little uncle master suddenly said, "The one at fault is Xiao Xiu. How can the rest of the great spiritual palace be innocent?" Yi Xian looked straight at little martial uncle. "You wanted to kill me. What wrong did Li Shiran do? Why did you target him?" Little martial uncle shook his head. "Young Master Yi, we are the ones in the wrong. We have nothing to do with the rest of the people from Great Spiritual God Palace. If we die, can you let them go?" Yi Xian looked straight at his junior uncle. "No." Right at this moment an old man suddenly appeared here. It was the outer court elder, Gu Qing. Gu Qing bowed slightly to Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. "Just call me Yi Xian." Gu Qing smiled bitterly. He wanted to plead for mercy but didn't dare to. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before saying, "I'll give you face." But with that he willed in his mind. Qi. The Azure Profound Sword entered Xiao Xiu's body and started to absorb her soul. Xiao Xiu stared at Yi Xian with eyes full of hatred. "Yi Xian, you will end up worse than me in the future." Yi Xian smiled. "Maybe. But I can see your end, but you won't be able to see mine." Xiao Xiu wanted to say something but Yi Xian flicked his sleeve. Boom. Chao Xiu's soul was completely absorbed. Yi Xian turned to look at the palace lord of the great spiritual god palace, Yu Wan. The latter still wanted to say something, but the Qingxian sword had already sunk into his glabella. Bang! Yu Wan was instantly absorbed. After he killed Yu Wan, Yi Xian looked at the junior uncle. That little martial uncle. Little martial uncle was silent. Yi Xian pointed at Gu Qing. From this moment onward, he's the palace master of great spiritual palace. Do you have a problem with that? Gu Qing's expression changed drastically when he heard this, and he hurriedly said, How can I be the palace master? Yi Xian gazed at Gu Qing. If you become the palace master, then I'll give you face. If it's anyone else, then I won't give it any face. Gu Qing spoke bitterly. I'm not strong enough. No one in great spiritual palace will submit to me. Meanwhile, the junior martial uncle spoke abruptly. Submit. My entire great spiritual palace will submit to you. Yi Xian glanced at the junior martial uncle, and then he withdrew his thumb that was resting on the hilt of his sword. The junior martial uncle gazed at Gu Qing. I'll kill anyone who refuses to submit. Gu Qing hesitated for a moment before he nodded. He knew that if he didn't become the palace master, then great spiritual palace would really be destroyed. Meanwhile, Yi Xian spoke abruptly. Elder Gu Qing, remember to contact me at any time if you have any problems. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished into the horizon. Elder Gu Qing turned around to look at the junior martial uncle, and the junior martial uncle spoke softly. He's actually become so strong. Even though Yi Xian was strong all those years ago, he wasn't so monstrous. But the current Yi Xian wasn't just strong. He was simply a freak. He was too terrifying. Besides ancient god realm experts, no one could stop Yi Xian any longer. Gu Qing had quite a complicated feeling in his heart. He hadn't expected that an outer court disciple he'd casually recruited would actually be so terrifying. After Yi Xian left Great Spiritual Palace, he found a place to reconstruct Li Xiran's physical body. With the help of the Azure Profound Sword, it wasn't a difficult task. 3 days later, somewhere by a lake, Li Xiran sat cross-legged in front of Yi Xian. At this moment his aura was even stronger than before, because his soul had been strengthened by the Azure Profound Sword. Around an hour later, Li Xiran stood up and looked at Yi Xian. Brother Yi, thank you. Yi Xian smiled. Do you still want to return to Great Spiritual Palace? Li Xiran hesitated for a moment and said, I want to. Yi Xian nodded. Sure. Now that Elder Gu Qing is the palace master of Great Spiritual Palace, if you return, you'll be able to help him a lot. Li Xiran smiled. Brother Yi, if I may be so bold as to ask, how strong are you now? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, Under 3 swords I'm invincible. Above 3 swords 1 for 1. As soon as he finished speaking, he instantly regretted it. Meanwhile, Xiao Ta spoke abruptly. Young master, I won't say anything when you say you're invincible under 3 swords. But your 1 for 1 above 3 swords is too much. Too much. Yi Xian. At the side, Li Xiran was suddenly curious. Brother Yi, who are these 3 swords? Yi Xian blinked and then he smiled. My younger sister, my father, and my big brother. Li Xiran. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, Brother Li, go back to the great spiritual divine palace. I'm going to be busy. Li Xiran nodded. Brother Yi, take care. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. After Li Xiran left, Yi Xian turned around and left as well. He went directly to the pavilion, and as soon as he arrived, the pavilion master came out to welcome him. The pavilion master cupped his fists. Young Master Yi. He was already aware of what happened at Great Spiritual Palace. Yi Xian killed Lin Fan from God's graveyard. And it was an instant kill. Needless to say, when he heard this news, he was completely dumbfounded. Lin Fan was a great sage-level swordsman. Yi Xian smiled. Pavilion Master, I don't come without a reason. This time I'm here to ask you about something. The Pavilion Master said, Young Master Yi. Please speak. Yi Xian said, Where is God's graveyard? Hearing this, Xiao Lu's face was full of shock. Young Master Yi. Yi Xian smiled and did not say anything. After a moment of silence, Xiao Lu took out a scroll and handed it to Yi Xian. The entrance to God's graveyard is on this scroll. Yi Xian put away the scroll, then took out a storage ring and handed it to Xiao Lu. Thank you. The pavilion master glanced at the storage ring and hurriedly shook his head. There's no need for that. Xian thought for a moment and then he said, help me pay attention to the movements of the various powers, especially the god's graveyard. He didn't want something like Li Xian to happen again. The pavilion master smiled. That's no problem. Xian put away the storage ring. Then I owe you a favor. The pavilion master was delighted. This was his objective, and that was to make Xian owe him a favor. A favor was much more valuable than an eternal divine crystal. Xian didn't say anything else and he just cupped his fists. Farewell. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished into the horizon. The pavilion master looked up into the horizon and said softly, is he going to the god's graveyard? The god's graveyard. The pavilion master couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly when he thought of this. This was truly too absurd. Xian flew on his sword, and he arrived at the entrance of God's graveyard in less than 2 hours. The god's eye was located in a separate world, and their entrance was in a starry sky. Xian stood before an enormous white hole, and the god's graveyard was just past this hole. However, he didn't go in. He didn't know much about God's graveyard, so he would probably be ganged up on and beaten to death if he went in rashly. Right at this moment, the white hole suddenly trembled, and then an old man walked out from within it in next to no time. A great sage. Xian glanced at the old man and the old man noticed him as well. The old man frowned when he saw Xian. Who are you? Xian blinked. Are you going to look for that Xian? The old man gazed at Xian. How do you know? Xian said seriously, I know where Xian is. The old man sized up Xian and a hint of wariness appeared in his eyes. Who the hell are you? Xian was about to speak when the old man suddenly said, you're that Xian. Xian was stunned. The old man stared at Xian. You killed Lin Fan. Xian was about to speak when the old man turned and ran. The old man was very fast and he entered the hole in the blink of an eye. Seeing this, Xian's expression darkened. Damn it. The people of God's graveyard weren't so easy to fool. It would be very difficult for him to survive. At this moment, Sword Mausoleum's voice suddenly sounded, Young master, I've been here before. Xian was stunned and then asked, You and your master? Sword Mausoleum nodded, Yes. Master has been inside before. Xian hurriedly asked, Is she very powerful inside? Sword Mausoleum immediately said, Of course. Master is very powerful no matter where she goes. However, Master seemed to have lost one move when he fought with someone in there. Xian turned to look at the hole. Ai had been here before. And she had lost. Damn it. Wasn't it a little boastful to say that he wanted to destroy God's graveyard? At this moment, Sword Mausoleum suddenly said, Young master, you're not afraid, are you? Xian was stunned and then he laughed. Can a small God's graveyard take one of my swords? Sword Mausoleum said, Then you go in, young master. Xian was speechless. Chapter 1807. Seeing that Xian didn't move, Sword Mausoleum said again, Young master, are you really afraid? Xian said seriously, I won't kill today. Spare their lives. After saying that, he turned around and left. Sword Mausoleum was speechless. Not long after Xian left, an old man slowly walked out of the white star hole. As soon as the old man came out, the surrounding starry sky trembled slightly as if it had fallen a little. The old man wore a loose black robe and held a walking stick in his hand. He seemed to be carrying a heavy load on his back. He walked very slowly and seemed to have no strength left in him. The old man glanced around and frowned slightly. Where is he? At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from beside the old man. Apotheon Mu, Xian has left. Apotheon Mu nodded slightly. I'm too late. As he spoke, he glanced at the end of the Star River in the distance. I never expected that there would be such a genius in the outside world. He's not simple. The voice sounded again. This person killed 2 people of my god's graveyard in a row. He can't be left alive. At this moment, some strange runes suddenly appeared in the space around Apotheon Mu. As these strange runes appeared, some flames actually appeared on the old man's body. Apotheon Mu frowned slightly. He thought for a moment and said, I can't stay outside for too long. Find a way to let him enter my god's graveyard. or lure him here. After saying that, he turned around and left. As soon as he entered the white star hole, the strange red runes around him suddenly disappeared. Restrictions. The supreme laws of nature had restricted many top-notch experts in this universe. After the old man left, the scene quickly returned to calm. After Zhou Xian left the entrance of the god's graveyard, he returned to Azure Prefecture. In fact, he wasn't a killer. As long as the god's graveyard didn't come looking for trouble with him, he couldn't be bothered to look for them. Wasn't it nice to cultivate every day and then accompany his lovely wife? In the palace, Zhou Xian sat on the dragon throne with Tuo Yen in his arms. Tuo Yen said softly, "I don't think I'm pregnant." Zhou Xian blinked. "Then let's continue working hard." Tuo Yen rolled his eyes at Zhou Xian. "Idiot." Zhou Xian laughed and wrapped his arms around Tuo Yen's waist. Tuo Yen looked up at Zhou Xian and said seriously, "I feel that something is not right." Zhou Xian asked, "What's not normal?" Tuo Yen said solemnly, "Logically speaking, I should be pregnant." But, hearing this, Zhou Xian frowned. "What do you mean?" Tuo Yen looked at Zhou Xian. "How many children does your father have?" Zhou Xian said solemnly, "2. I think I have an older sister." Xianxia. Thinking of this, he missed Sister Shui again. Unfortunately, he didn't know where she had gone to have fun. Tuo Yen continued, "Then your father." Zhou Xian suddenly interrupted Tuo Yen's words. "What do you mean, my father?" "It's our father." Tuo Yen blinked. A trace of warmth flowed in his heart. Zhou Xian held Tuo Yen's hand and said softly, "You mean the problem lies with me?" Tuo Yen nodded. "It's very likely. Because of your bloodline. Bloodline power." Hearing this, Zhou Xian suddenly understood. His bloodline power was very special. Could it be that his mother could give birth to him because of the immortal bloodline? Thinking of this, Zhou Xian's face darkened. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Shrine. Ancestors above, Zhou Xian has no talent and no virtue. From this moment on, Zhou Xian's position as the heir is removed and Yi Lang will succeed him. The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his lips. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. "Why?" At this moment, a somewhat timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral shrine. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, Zhou Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Zhou Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed slightly to the people in the ancestral shrine and said timidly, "First elder, my brother Zhou Xian is the heir. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The first elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the first elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral shrine. She once again bowed to the elders on both sides. "Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan for the mining rights. He is fighting for the clan with his life on the line. His fate is unknown. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair." "Impudent." The first elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away from me." At this time, the new heir Yi Lang suddenly laughed. "You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The first elder coldly replied, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said with some anger, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new heir Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of heir, it's everyone's wish. What are you shouting about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry, she just held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yilang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the heir, I need 10 personal guards. From now on you'll be my personal guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate will go through fire and water for the heir. I'm willing to die 1,000 deaths. Yilang nodded slightly. Drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show mercy, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yilang's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu didn't know what he saw, but he suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man wore a tight-fitting robe which was torn and tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Zhou Xian, who rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yilang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his expression was frighteningly gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his expression turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his expression changed. He quickly looked at Yilang and was about to speak. At this time, Zhou Xian suddenly leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness and he stumbled and fell. Yiling did not stop there and he rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yilang in the ancestral hall suddenly roared, Zhou Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Zhou Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's expression turned ugly, while Zhou Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man. As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's entire face was a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me. Zhou Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, who was crying for help. He walked up to Yiling. Seeing Yiling's appearance, Zhou Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Zhou Xian, her tears flowed. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Zhou Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Zhou Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Zhou Xian's position as prince shall be removed, and Yilang shall take over. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yilang. On both sides there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yiling, and she was Zhou Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Zhou Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yiling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yiling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother Zhou Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The great elder looked at Yiling coldly. This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave. Yiling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the great elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince Yilang suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder replied coldly, Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years and even now he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young master Yi Lang inherits the title of prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard quickly bowed. "This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death. Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to see something and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe and the robe was tattered and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Zhou Xian who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this moment, Zhou Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger, and before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Bang! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped down on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Ping! You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.